What you are about to listen to is part 2 of 3 of the deconstruction of the Book of Mormon. If you already listened to the anniversary episode of 7.5 hours, you won't be getting any new content in this episode. But, as per request, this is the second part in the splitting up of that huge episode into smaller pieces. Enjoy!
This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
That is, man lived before he came to this earth. He is an eternal being. Joseph Smith gave to the world the true understanding of the origin of man. That man comes to earth with a divine and eternal purpose.
Let's examine church doctrine.
And through it, all who believe and obey the glorious gospel of God, all who are true and faithful and overcome the world, all who suffer for Christ and his word,
All of it.
all shall become as their Maker and sit with him on his throne and reign with him forever in everlasting glory.
And see what it has to offer.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished and love of God and neighbor rules the world. In the name of Jesus Christ.
What can be gleaned from Mormon teachings?
A corollary to the pernicious falsehood that God is dead is the equally pernicious doctrine that there is no devil. Satan himself is the father of both of these lies. To believe them is to surrender to him.
Where is the church heading?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason, so if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But most importantly,
May you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
Skepticize everything. Oh, yeah.
Let's go back to the numbers in our statistical study. Remember, on the scale from 0 to 100, 0 is the Book of Mormon itself, and the higher the number gets, the less significant it is in our study, with a baseline of 85. In the study, manuscript story written by Solomon Spaulding scored 78 on the statistical scale. That's much more significant to the Book of Mormon than any other books that fell closer to the baseline, like Pride and Prejudice at 83.5, or Mercy Otis Warren's book on the American Revolution at 84. But Spaulding's score of 78 was greatly overshadowed by the significance of the View of the Hebrews, which scored an exceptional 58.5 on the study, which is a lot closer to 0. To review, the Book of Abraham and the Book of Commandments scored an unsurprising 9.1, whereas the Book of Moses scored a 2.8. But we know that those were written by Joseph, so of course they would be the most significant books to include in the study. In between the score of 58.5 by View of the Hebrews and the Book of Commandments of 9.1, there is a major range of seemingly hundreds of dots. The closer these dots are to 0, the closer to the Book of Mormon they will be. The first book of Napoleon landed closest so far as books not written by Joseph Smith himself, and it scored an unbelievable 22.3. It's a statistical outlier, and it's an astoundingly high score when given the parameters and rigor of this statistical study. Well, like I said earlier, There is one other book to discuss that lies even closer to the other 3 books that Joseph Smith produced. Classified as the most statistically similar to the Book of Mormon, with a score of an amazing 20.3, is a book titled The Late War Between the United States and Great Britain by Gilbert J. Hunt. Well, unfortunately, there is one problem with that truly unprecedented score of 20.3. Well, it's a falsified statistic. I mean, when you're doing statistical studies, you have to watch out for outliers like this to see if there was something wrong with the study or to see if it actually is a statistical outlier and it's relevant. Well, the late war is definitely an outlier, and that 20.3 is an inaccurate score. They had to adjust how they rated the book because there's an appendix at the end that upset the score a little bit. Now, you might not think that removing an appendix in a book could actually change the outcome of a study like this, but when the large appendix was removed from the late war, in order to compare book for book on a level playing ground, the book's score moved from 20.3 down to a 17.4. That is unbelievably close to a 0 compared to all the other books. Now, if you understand how the study scored these books, that number 17.4 is about as perfect as you can get for a source text of the Book of Mormon. Before we discuss the unbelievable amount of similarities between the late War of 1812 and the Book of Mormon, I designed a little game to illustrate the point in a somewhat entertaining way. Today we are graced with the presence of David Michael. He runs the My Book of Mormon podcast, and if anybody has been living under a rock or just doesn't know what podcasts are, you need to check out his show. It goes hand in hand lovely with this show. So, David Michael, welcome to coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Bryce, for the very kind introduction.
Absolutely. So I have you on here for kind of a special reason today.
And for the record, everyone, I don't know what that is. This is coming in cold, just like the theme of my show. I kind of never know what I'm going to get when I hit record, and I think we're just staying with that theme. So, Bryce, just like everyone else wants to know,
you're
why
most
am I
delightful
here?
in your ignorance. So, today we're deconstructing the Book of Mormon, and I want to get a bit of your perspective because you were never Mormon. Most people that listen to this show have, they know your story and have heard your show. But just in case, let's kind of get a little bit of David Michael. Like, you're never Mormon, but you're reading the Book of Mormon, right?
Yeah, I've actually been a never Mormon my entire life. Yeah,
lucky.
Yeah, but so the show that I have, My Book of Mormon, is I decided to just do a cold read of the Book of Mormon. I have. Every episode, I never read ahead. It would just open, hit record, turn to the next page, and start reading, and just give my commentary or kind of what was going through my head or trying to make sense of what was written. And so then we kept going with it. We read the Pricey Pearl, also known as the Pearl of Great Price, but that just took too long to say. So we did that one, and now we're in the Doctrines and Covenants. And for those of you that don't know, your host of the show, Bryce Blankenagel, is actually co-hosting the My Book of Mormon podcast Doctrines and Covenants section. So I'm super thankful. It's given a new spin to the show, which I think has been a lot of fun. I think the listeners have loved it. And so yeah, Bryce, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I'm happy to be on your show for whatever it is that we're doing, which I still don't know.
Yes, I hope you're strapped in and ready for this, because we're going to do a little bit of comparative analysis on the Book of Mormon. So there are a lot of authorship theories of where the Book of Mormon possibly came from. I know you listen to this show, so you kind of probably fall in line with most of the listeners of the show thinking that Solomon Spaulding.
Well, shall we be discussing the Solomon Spaulding theory?
Yes, that is quite correct, sir. So
yes, I do listen to this show. Big fan. I think I was your first fan, Bryce, actually, for the record.
I think you were. According to iTunes reviews, yes, you are the official first fan.
That's right.
Yeah, and nobody can take that away from you. Feather in the cap. So today we are going to compare it with some interesting phrases. But those phrases aren't going to be from manuscript found, because obviously we don't have manuscript found that was written by Solomon Spaulding. But the Ex-Mormon Foundation ran a huge textual analysis of 100,000 books that were authored before 1830, just to look for phrases that were similar between the Book of Mormon and other books. And there were a couple of them that stood out. One of them is entitled "The Late War of 1812." So if anybody wants to know about the Solomon Spaulding manuscript found theory, you can listen to episode 14 and 15 of this show. That's where I kind of introduce the idea and introduce Sidney Rigdon and the connections between him and Joseph pre-1830. However, this is a completely new idea. I haven't talked about this a lot on the show because there is, there's a lot of nuance to it, and there is a lot more actual evidence that supports this theory as opposed to the Solomon Spaulding manuscript theory, because primarily the manuscript found doesn't exist, but this text does exist.
All right.
And the title page.
All right, I want to make sure I'm following along. And sorry if everybody else is on board and I'm the one holding it back. Sorry, apologize to everyone. Cut all this out if you want, Bryce. But okay, so we're not discussing the Solomon Spaulding theory right now. We're discussing the War of 1812 theory.
Yes,
what
is
that exactly? Like I thought so I mean, it kind of sounded like to me that the most plausible explanation that it was a mismatch of several sources, and this is just one of those sources, right?
That is correct, but we're not going to talk about manuscript found. This is all about the late war. The title page of this book is actually really fascinating with what it reads. It says, The Historical Reader, which was a book series made for school children in New York City. And the title page says, The Late War Between the United States and Great Britain from June 1812 to February 1815.
So far, that sounds accurate. Yeah.
Yes. So that was like Joseph's 9/11, right? So everybody nowadays living thinks about 9/11 and they know like where they were when it happened and everything. Well, that was Joseph's war. That's what he was, he was a kid when this was happening, and everybody around everywhere was talking about this war because it was, it was basically the United States' second attempt, or, second fight against Britain for sovereignty, basically.
Well, I believe it was the first and only time that the United States was successfully invaded.
I don't know about that. That sounds about right, though.
I believe it is. Where a foreign army invaded. I mean, they burned down Washington, D.C. I mean, they burned down the White House.
A lot of it was involved with the Navy as well, right? Because the British had such an intensely strong naval force that the United States was just so lacking at the time. So they were able to blockade us forever, and and
we did, however, we defended that Mississippi hardcore, so that helped, and that's also where Andrew Jackson got his name, because he did. You know what? Let's not get into 1812. We're going to nerd out on history, but fascinating war, and I agree with you. If I was living a mere what were we talking? Decade later, 20, 30 years later. That would be, even at that far away, right? You'd still feel the impact of that. But I think when the story first starts, we're talking like not even 10 years later, probably.
Yeah, well, people were talking about it. I mean, it was something that was on everybody's mind, like the Iraq War is now. I mean, and Joseph was 7 years old at the time that it started. So, I mean, people were talking about it while he was in his most formative years of his youth.
Yeah, so as far as they knew, when is the British Navy going to come back for another round?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, it was the nuclear scare of the 1950s, because nobody was, everybody was worried what was going to happen, who was going to set off the first nuke, right?
Okay, so this was a very popular, well-read book then?
Well, more than that, it was actually, let me finish reading the title page of it here. It says, in quotes, in the scriptural style. So it means that it's written in like the King James type of style of the book.
Right.
So, and they did that so children that were learning from this would read the book and think of the Bible while they were reading it, and it would motivate them to read the Bible, of course. So
That's your theory, right? It didn't say that.
No, it says that at the beginning of the book.
It didn't say they were doing it so kids would think of the Bible, though.
No, it was as a proselyting campaign, and it was adopted by a lot of New York schools. It says right here, altered and adapted for the use of schools throughout the United States by G.J. Hunt.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah. I
I thought you were just speculating.
No. That's what it was.
Comes right out and admits
for.
it.
Yeah. So it's a hell of a book, and like I said, the Ex-Mormon Foundation found it has a very high level of correlation with the Book of Mormon.
So have you found a few excerpts that are like comparable, and we're going to do a little analysis?
We are going to play a drinking game, actually.
Oh, even more. So I was already like, this sounds fun, and now you threw in drinking game, and it's like, well, now it can't not be fun.
So I am going to read a phrase, and you, from your perspective, are going to decide if it came out of the late war or if it came from the Book of Mormon.
Oh.
And if you get it right, I drink. If you don't get it right, then you drink.
All right, so statistically, even if I'm flipping a coin on this, we're both drinking.
Probably. We're probably
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I have a full beer ready to go for this too.
All right, so my goal is to achieve more than 50% correct answers. I'll call this. This isn't. I'm not shooting for an A. I'm shooting for make Bryce drink more than me.
We're looking for an F+ here.
All right, always up for the challenge. I mean, come on. I read the book. I should know it, right?
But a little caveat though here. I can't give it like there's a lot of things in it in the phrases that are going to be a dead giveaway, like names of places. So I'm going to cut those out. I'll just say blank or just not say them. But we're just going to compare phrases and a lot of operative words.
All right.
Are you ready?
I feel like you just weighted the deck a little in your favor, but all right.
We'll find out. We'll see.
Not making it easy on me.
More drunk at the end of this. Right. All right. So first phrase. They had an abundance of curious workmanship therein, such as surpassed the comprehension of all the wise men of the East from the beginning to this day. Late War or Book of Mormon?
I don't remember. You had me. I was like, that's totally Book of Mormon until all the wise men of the East. I don't recall that phrase, so my final answer, I'm going with Late War.
That is the Late War. Right.
Drink up, Bryce.
I'll take a drink.
If only you'd stopped like 3 words short, then I would have gone the other way.
That was the first one. That's the warm-up.
All right. That was
just wait.
That was my softball. All right. Let's keep going.
For the blank put the burning brand to the houses from which they could not flee, and burnt them alive therein. And the flames and the smoke arose, and their cries and their groans reached the high chancery of heaven, where they will stand recorded until the coming of that day for which all other days were made.
Wow. If I read that in the Book of Mormon, I might have blocked it from my memory because I feel a little sick just hearing it.
Well, there were a lot of like crazy scenes of war that happened in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, but talking about burnings and I mean that almost sounded like the whole women and children being burned. And wasn't it Alma? That no, it wasn't Alma.
Sure, you know it better than I do.
Who was it? The two that just like, no, we can't help them. We just have to let that happen. And then they tore down the prison they were in with their
was
god
that
powers.
Alma? Yeah, no, that was Alma the Younger, I think.
Was it Alma Jr.? It might have been. I'm mixing them up, man. It was during the time of Ammon. I know they were like friends, and he kind of stole the spotlight because he was so awesome. But anyway, sorry. What were we talking about? Oh yes, I have to take a guess. So, I just don't remember that. And so I'm going to have to say again, we're going to go with the late war.
That is correct again. All right.
Okay. And don't get me, I had to really think about it because that sounded Book of Mormon-y for sure.
All right. I hope you're ready for this one. Next one is, and it came to pass that...
Sorry, reflex.
that one other ship also did sail forth, and whither she did go we know not. And it came to pass that
Drink.
in this year there were many people who went forth into the land northward.
Okay, that was totally Book of Mormon. That was the, I've never forgot about them because we never found out about them. And that's kind of like, when you like go back and watch Lost and you're like, yeah, we never really found out about that part. What the hell? And you're kind of mad about it. Yeah, I feel that way about whoever they were. If you said his name, I'd thank you after this. But whoever it was, that dude, they just took a bunch of boats and they went north and that was that. And
they were gone.
Yeah, so I'm going with Book of Mormon on this one.
Right again.
Aha,
However,
crushing you.
That is. Let me drink real quick.
Can I make you take a bonus drink if I can remember his name?
No.
All right.
That was not a rule.
Then
set
just
out
give it
before
away.
we
Give it
started
away.
this
What was
game.
his name?
All right, but I can't remember, dude.
Oh shit!
You know it better than I do. I'm telling you.
What was his name? He was pretty famous. All right, doesn't matter. All right.
But anyway, so yeah, the verse that was reflected against in the late war said, "It came to pass," so that was in there, that one of the strong ships of the king had approached the country of the south.
Oh, all he did was switch south to north?
Yeah, pretty much.
You should have said, the blank, and then it would have been a trick question.
Of the blank. I should have, yep.
Can't give it away.
Yep. All right, so you ready for the next one?
I'm always ready.
And thus we did go forth with all our might against the blank, who were in the city of blank.
Okay, that was said about 5,000 times in adding different blanks into the blanks in the Book of Mormon. So that's Book of Mormon.
Ah, that is a Book
Come
of Mormon.
on, man. These are all, that was the easiest one yet. That phrase, you could have thrown in Nephite in the beginning or Lamanite, and then you could have picked any two random cities and thrown them at the end.
So let me read the phrase in the same way that came from the late war that was derived from.
All right.
Lo, we are stronger than the host of blank, therefore let us go with all our might against their chief city and make capture thereof.
All right. I look, I'm with you, but I'm sorry, you picked something that I had read so many times, it's burned into my memory verbatim. So
I was underestimating your recollection for this, apparently.
Seriously, I really think that if Joseph Smith had any superpower, it's like he figured out Control-C, Control-V before any of us, right? Like that man could copy and paste things verbatim so many times in the same book.
Exactly. And that's why so many people that are like trying to examine all the authorship theories just come up with like I don't know where it came from, because there's tons of places that it came from. Well, Joseph read a lot. He had access to libraries. He read stuff. That's what happens. All right, so this one, let me get your thoughts on this one. The fourth day of this 7th month, which is, and then blank because it fills in the time frame.
Okay. That's it?
Yeah, the fourth day of this 7th month, which is.
Okay, man.
If I give any more, then it gives it away.
Oh, I remember that. I'll go Book of Mormon. That sounds. I think that.
Well, no. Think about the day that is the fourth day of the 7th month.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is 4th of July. Wow. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't catch that. I remember that coming up in the Book of Mormon. We had 4th of July. It is Book of Mormon.
That is both of them.
Oh,
I think we should both take a drink.
We both drink? Or you drink twice for a trick question, but I am thirsty, so you win this round.
All right. But, I mean, it says it the exact same thing. The other one of them says in the 10th year of the reign of judges. The other says the birthday of Colombian liberty and independence. So, but they both say the 4th of July, which is, there's an 8-word phrase there that shows up in both of them that is extremely rare to find in textual criticism.
By the way, while you've been talking, sorry, that all sounded interesting, but I was Googling, and I got the name. You ready for the man that took the boats north? Haygoth.
Haygoth.
You knew him.
That's right.
Haygoth.
Yep. I would never have been able to guess that.
No, I'm really glad you didn't give me time to try, because I would have been just sitting here for an hour going, something. Anyway, all right. What's next?
All right. But if peradventure we should be overcome, even then shall not the sacred cause of liberty perish.
Man, you could go either way with this. We haven't had a legit, what's the other one called? What are my options? Book of Mormon and
Late War.
Late War, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Forgot what game I was playing. We haven't had a Late War in a while, and so I'll just, because it sounds familiar, but I'm going to go Late War.
Ah, you are correct.
Oh,
again.
man, I thought you were trying to trick me, and I
Yes.
busted you trying to trick me. Because, man, that really did sound
You
like the
did
Book of Mormon.
indeed.
Do you have a compare from the Book of Mormon?
On that one, no, but it was referring to the cause of liberty being referred to as the title of liberty.
Oh, that, yeah.
And then
if
the
you'd said title,
peradventure
I
being-
had no choice but to go.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I can't change even one of these words to make it sound different to try and tip it in my favor. But
All right, hold on a second. So the Late War, does it talk about the cause of liberty being like someone's robe that he tore and put on a stick?
no, it's talking about the cause. Most of the time, it's referring to it as the Declaration of Independence, I believe.
So every time the Book of Mormon gets like really, really weird, is that when like Joe actually did do some authorship?
Maybe because he was smashing in his own thoughts.
You know what I mean? Like, where do you have source material for some some captain in the field tearing his clothes up and writing stuff on him and putting him on a stick, and suddenly everyone's excited? It's like, what's happening right now? This got super weird.
I'm trying to remember that. I think that was based off of another captain in the Civil War that happened to.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I'm only at the early phases of the, taking care of, or doing this episode, so I might come up with that, or that might come up just in researching this, but I'm pretty sure that came from somebody.
Well, I'm excited. If you figure out where that whole title of liberty came from, because that is one weird story.
Right.
Even when people explained it to me, I was like, that's still super weird.
Yeah, exactly. And, do you remember the story of King Benjamin that, like, everybody brought tents around and he built this huge tower that he could stand in?
Oh, yeah. And then Alma went out and he's like, why are you guys praying on towers? You're super evil, Lamanites. I was like, what? I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, sorry. Yes, I do recall.
That was based off of a pastor that everybody loved in the burned over district, and there was this huge revival that came around, and then he died right after the revival. So that has a direct analog to something that was happening during Joe's time at a revival that he probably went to.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of those connections.
Yeah, just like all the names he picked happen to like exist very similarly geographically.
Yeah, 12 of the names that he used were actually names in Japan. I mean, there's tons of places where all the names came from. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it never even occurred to me. Like, I actually, my family is in northern central Pennsylvania area, right? Like, that's where my parents live.
Okay.
And so I know that area. And yeah, it's right. It's like Lehigh Valley and Lehigh County, and you know what I mean? There's lots of those. I'm not even doing it justice. There's tons that I've
most
heard,
of them,
like, oh yeah,
they're spelled Lehigh with Lehighh, like Lehigh, right? Yeah, which is spelled different because Joe was great at doing that, just taking something and then spelling it different and then saying it was his.
Well, he was under a deadline. You just spell it quicker.
Right.
There you go.
Marty's money wasn't going to be around forever.
All right, I'm sure you got more questions for me.
Yes.
So far,
so I think
have
we're about
I gotten
to talk
one
about...
wrong yet?
What? No, you haven't lost one yet.
I have 100% right now.
I know, this is horrible. So we're going to talk about your favorite thing here in a second.
Winning? Because I'm crushing it right now.
I have a feeling like you're going to really get this one, but I'm still going to read it. Like, you're going to get this easy, but I'm going to read it just to illustrate the differences.
All right.
Now these wonderful blank were made partly of brass and were cunningly contrived with curious works, like unto a clock, and as it were a large ball.
I don't remember clock being in the Book of Mormon. I mean, they're clearly talking about the magic brass ball, which later became the Liahona, much later in the book. Suddenly, we were just like supposed to know that's what it was called. Seriously, nowhere in the first half of the Book of Mormon does the word Liahona get mentioned. And there's a whole thing about it. It goes from just like the brass ball, and then it becomes a compass when they're on the water. And you're like, well, that's interesting. But yeah, Liahona comes up later. But anyway, it sounds like that's what they're describing. But the, I don't remember it saying it was like a clock. And so I'm going to go with the late warm.
Yes, that is.
100%.
You're killing me here.
Was it the clock? Was that the part?
The clock. That was the giveaway, right?
Yeah.
But in the Book of Mormon, it says round ball with curious workmanship used with brass, and it says the ball, when within the ball were 2 spindles, like every clock has 2 spindles. So in that one phrase,
there was a magic brass ball in the late war?
Actually, it was talking about their underwater torpedoes.
Whoa.
Yeah, now these wonderful torpedoes were made partly of brass. Yeah.
That is wild.
In 1812, they had underwater torpedoes. How crazy is that?
Seriously, Bryce, this is why I am such a fan of your show. I'm like, my jaw's open right now. I love this. It's fantastic.
How crazy is it? Oh, I love it. Okay, are you ready for this one?
The magic brass ball is a torpedo. And they had submarines in the Book of Mormon. It's all coming together now.
Isn't it just amazing? All the connections run so much deeper too. I want to get a hold of the copy. That's the thing is right now there are over 200 copies of this thing that still exist, and it went through like 6 different printings. Originally, it was released in 1816 when Joseph would have been going through.
But it hasn't been digitized yet.
No, it has been digitized. Absolutely.
Oh.
No, you can get a copy.
Well, then just
of it.
download it. What's wrong with you? Get it.
Well, I should. I just need to take the time to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, it's got to be amazing seeing all the connections there.
I'll tell you what, Bryce. I need to get you an anniversary gift, so I will find it for you. I will find you a copy of the late war of. It wouldn't hurt you to email me the full title, but yeah, I will find it. And get it to you. And happy anniversary, by the way.
Wow.
Well done. What a breakout year. Yeah, I think you definitely get Rookie of the Year. And, yeah.
Well, I'm glad I get an award from somebody, It's got to be nice to be an award-winning show, and now I know what it feels like. Rookie of the Year. Feels great.
No, we'll make it official. Yeah. I actually know I went to the Brody Awards and looked up when do the nominations start for next year, because it was like you just missed the cutoff last year, and I probably wouldn't be an award-winning show if you made the cutoff. But anyway,
I need to send off some emails.
I think you might have beat me.
Right. See what those people are about. See what the criteria are.
You certainly deserved it more. My goodness, I can't imagine how much work you put into the show that you do. It's, I'm floored how much content you can deliver every 2 weeks. And then you co-host on my show.
Right. And now I was going to say, and now just in my experience co-hosting with your show, it just boggles my mind how much you don't do for your show. It's fantastic. And it's an award-winning show. I'm jealous.
Yeah. There you go. You know why? Because I'm never wrong. And you know how we know that? Because I just scored 100% on your test.
There's still a few more left. Give it a second.
Oh, we're not done? Oh my God.
Get you on
what I did?
These.
You know what I did? I have not been listening to my source material. I believe I might have boasted, which we all know, according to all Mormon doctrine, is a big no-no. So this one might bite me in the ass.
All right. Are you ready for this one?
I'm actually a little afraid now, but sure.
But it came to pass in the same year that the people of blank were revenged of the evil.
Revenged?
Revenged of the evil.
Revenged of the evil.
Yes.
Late war.
Ah, damn it.
I was like, I don't remember. Revenge. I don't remember that word coming up. if you just said like venged or venged, that's not
Venged.
a word. But vengeful or smote, that certainly would have qualified.
Right? But that I can't change what the text is there. I got to read it verbatim.
All right.
But
I'm with you.
To clarify that though, what this study did was they tried to run matches of large phrases together between the two books, and for the record, that verse had a 12 word match to that same sentence in the late war. Like there were, out of the 18 words in that verse and in those sentences, 12 of them matched each other in the same exact order.
Oh, trust me. The only reason that I'm getting these right is because there's one word that stands out that's different. You know what I mean? Like everything else about all of these phrases, it's like very identical. And it's usually at the end. So you'll like start reading and I'm going, don't know. And then at the very end you say, revenged. I'm like, I don't remember that. And that happened earlier where there's just like one or two words that don't add up. But yeah, for the most part, if I was doing this and I didn't want it to sound like plagiarism, that's exactly what I'd do.
Just change one word?
I'd change one word. You know what I mean? Everything else can stay the same. Screw it.
Right. I've done book reports off of Cliff Notes before. I know how this works. All right. Next one. I'm trying to decide which one to read here. See which one will get you.
Which, by the way, I don't know what this says about me. Like, am I now a Book of Mormon expert? When did that happen? How do I know even every last phrase and word?
Well, you've gotten close to the church, man. You're starting to speak Mormonese, and like the best way to understand a fraud is to study all the real ones, right? So when you spot out non-Mormonese in a Mormonese sentence, you're like, oh, I see it. That's a problem. All right, so let's get on to the next phrase here. And so the judgment of the Lord fell upon them for their unrighteousness.
Huh. That has to be Book of Mormon? Because, I mean, yeah, that's the whole theme of the book.
That is the late war. Take a drink, finally.
Oh, I finally got one wrong. Are you serious?
Yeah, that is the late war.
And that's like so he stole the whole central theme from this book. I mean, that's like, that might as well be, you know what I mean? Like, that's the Cliff Notes version of the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
Was that phrase. You summed the whole thing up.
Yeah, so tell me, if I would have added on the last part of this, and for their wicked and murderous deeds, would that have toned you off to one of the other?
You know what? I gotta be honest, it might not have.
Really?
It's sad. There's just do you have any idea how many times something like that, obviously the wording was different, and I missed it, but wow.
Right.
That's shocking.
Well, this guy obviously thought that, God was looking over the American troops as they were pushing back the British troops that were invading. So, I mean, he thought the judgment of the Lord was falling upon the British for their wicked and murderous deeds for invading.
Wow.
I mean, it's, yeah.
But correct me if that really is probably the most common thing that happens in the Book of Mormon is that God gets pissed at people for being bad.
Constantly. It never stops. It does that all the time.
There's no way I could rattle off the number of times. Who knows? Countless. Anyway, and it would happen a dozen times in one episode.
Oh, yeah. You can make a drinking game to it.
All right. Well, I got one wrong.
All right.
And, but you know what? I'm glad I did because I learned something. That's amazing. Cause it's, I think whoever, all right, I'm not on my show anymore. I'm on your show right now. So I have to switch gears. So that means that I can just outright say, so when Joe was making this book up, he actually read that and said, you know what? I think I could run with that. What if we just kept repeating that?
And make entire verses
He's
out
like,
of
this one.
Yes.
I can, this one's got legs. This dog can hunt. Let's go.
Let's try this one on for size. Nevertheless, it came to pass that blank was appointed by the voice of the people to be blank and a governor over the people of blank.
Ooh. I'm gonna. I'm going to go Book of Mormon again because I think this is talking about Alma.
Think about your last answer.
Am I wrong again? Go ahead.
No, that was the Book of Mormon. All right.
Was this one about Alma?
That was Pahoran being appointed chief judge over the people of Nephi. But
wow.
Just for the record, though, like I'm pulling a few of these verses. The report, the website that I will have linked in the show notes for this episode that has all of the data of the actual computer study lists hundreds of these. Hundreds and hundreds.
These aren't
and
easy.
Hundreds.
Listen, don't get me wrong. I'm just a lot smarter than Bryce. This is why it's easy for me. But seriously, I'm making it seem easy. It's harder than it seems for mere mortals.
This is my show now. I can actually cut you off now. I can put the mute button on you.
That's true. This time I'm sending you my audio and you get to edit.
That's right. I get to make you say whatever I want you to say. You are my finger puppet. Anyway, all right, let's get to the last one. This one is punctuated, so it's not quite as fluent, but it has a lot of interesting words and phrases in it. Sent a proclamation throughout the land, and it came to pass that thousands did flock unto his standard. They went down with their armies.
Ooh. Wow. Man, you didn't drop it. See, the blanks threw me off a little. This one had no blanks. So it's, boy. I feel like I've read those exact words before. It's just like everything about that except for the fact that you didn't yell drink after it came to pass. Like I feel like that. I have read those. I'm going to go with Book of Mormon.
You are correct.
That was goodness. Close. But boy, that really did kind of sound like it could have been 1812ish too. And like it really did.
There are 4 different phrases in that match up word for word out of all
right, give them to us. Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Yeah, sent a proclamation is one, and it came to pass is one. Thousands did is one of them, and then flock unto his standard. And it implies the standard of liberty, which that's implied.
And you're talking about that was all within the same like context.
Yeah, this was all within like the same paragraph or the same sentence, and all of those phrases were in both of the books.
So basically all of the words that like sounded educated were the ones that were ripped off.
All of the ones that sounded outright plagiarized, yes. Yeah, I mean, and it's not just limited to this. And something else that surprised me quite a lot with all this analysis was the connections to things other than the Book of Mormon. So the late war. So the Bible is, this study factored out all of the similarities between the Book of Mormon and the Bible with all of the late war and all the other books that it studied, because there were so many direct plagiarisms from the book or from the Bible. It was throwing off of their statistics. Like, they have to ignore the thing that was plagiarized most from in order to create the Book of Mormon, just so it keeps their statistics relevant, because it's so far of a positive outlier.
Wow.
And even more than that, there's almost more parallels between an 1822 print of the Quran than there is the Bible.
Really?
Yeah, so there is almost more of the Book of Mormon plagiarized from the Book of Mormon from the Quran than there is from the Bible.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I hope you're getting into that later in your show.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot on this episode.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't recorded
it
yet.
I don't know what to make of that. That's like, what now?
Yeah. Joseph probably had an 1822 print of the Quran and was reading it. It's crazy. Well, I just thought it would be fun to have you come onto the show and kind of play this little game to see what you thought about the differences, the similarities between the late war of 1812 and the Book of Mormon, which you've demonstrated you're so very familiar with.
Well, Bryce, it was certainly fun for me. I hope it was fun for everyone else. Yeah. It was, I don't know. There was definitely some things I learned that I was shocked to find the entire theme of the Book of Mormon is ripped off. Yeah. I don't know, maybe I gave Joe a little more credit. That I thought he had a little more ingenuity than that, but sadly not.
Yes, well, you exit this quite victorious, sir, and thank you for playing. It was quite fun. So, give us the 30-second hard sell on your show. If people want to go check you out, want to find you, listen to the show, listen to us reading the Doctrine and Covenants, where can they go to find you?
You would first and foremost go to mybookofmormonpodcast.com, because everything you could possibly want to know is there. But then, of course, if you just use Google or iTunes or Stitcher or any of those things, you'll find it. But so we officially at this point, I don't know the timing of when we're each going to release our episodes, but Bryce and I have now recorded 3 episodes of the new Doctrines and Covenants episodes. So and at the rate we're going, it's going to be a long ride. It might take longer to get through this than it took to get through the Book of Mormon, which, I got to be honest, the Book of Mormon was more entertaining than what we've gotten so far. So I'm certainly happy that Bryce is there with us, because he makes it a hell of a lot more fun than it would be if I was on my own. My God, what could I even say? Could you imagine having to read that on your own and be funny?
No, I can't, and that's why you do it instead of me. I'd rather look at the history instead. There's a lot more there.
It's rough stuff, but I don't know. I've had a blast every time we do it. So I hope that the joy I feel from it resonates out amongst the listeners. But anyway, so there you go. I went over 30 seconds, but that's come check it out if you like it. Awesome, and if not, that's cool. I understand. If you just want the good history, you're at the right place.
All right. And, just to be clear for anybody that's listening, a lot of people that are believing Mormons actually do listen to David Michael read this book, because he offers an interesting perspective. You've had a couple of run-ins with some Mormons that emailed you saying that they were Mormon, started out Mormon and became not Mormon by it. But
I've had true believing Mormon patrons of the show.
Wow. So people that actually support the show monetarily, they want to see it go.
There was one that actually specifically said, I'm going to give you this money with one request. Don't give me the title, because that, to me, it would be offensive if I had the title.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, you don't take like a hard atheist line against it like this show does.
Bryce, to this day, I do not understand. It's like I've been appreciative and thank you, but that's part of why I kind of want to go and check out a ward and see what it's all about, because I still don't understand how you could believe it, but then be okay with what I did to it. Anyway, no. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yep, exactly. But yeah, that's the places where they can find you. And thank you for coming on the show for this little segment there.
Always fun to hang out with my buddy Bryce.
There you go.
You are an asset to the community, sir. And I think what you're doing will leave a bigger legacy than what I'm doing. I think I'm around for a few laughs, and I'm just gonna be that was funny. Remember back when that guy was funny? I think what you're doing, can actually stand the test of time and needs to be out there more. So thank you for what you're doing, because I know it's not easy.
And I would say that you might be calling it quits long before you're actually done with your stint here. We're gonna make you stick around for a while with the Doctrine and Covenants, because there's a lot of crazy fun stuff there that we're gonna be diving shoulder deep into. So don't think you're getting off the hook so early.
Hopefully, it becomes a moot point, Bryce, because everyone will just say, "Wow, this church is stupid. Why are we in it? Let's just go."
Yep. Anyway,
we all just go. Let's just go on strike. Yeah. Then we can just retire. You can retire with me.
That sounds pretty good. At that point, when the church says, "Yeah, okay, we're full of crap. We're done. See you later," I'll retire. I have no problem with that.
Happy to do it.
That's awesome. All right, yeah. Thanks for coming on, though, David.
You bet, Bryce.
Yeah.
Just to let everybody know, that whole discussion that we talked about during that little drinking game we were playing with the War of 1812,
We actually had this discussion a little while before I did any studying on it and realized the gravity of it, so if it sounded like I was ignorant about the War of 1812, it's because I definitely was. Regardless, thank you once again, David, for coming onto the show to help us understand the true power that copy and paste has to offer and gain some perspective on the consequences of that power falling into the wrong hands. Alright, let's get back to it. We began this episode by offering some historical context to the world that Joseph Smith lived in. And, we talked a little bit about what happened during the War of 1812 and how crazy it would be to step in Joseph's shoes for just a few minutes. Joseph had been hearing people talk about the war that Napoleon was waging throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa. He was probably reading dozens of headlines in newspapers and investigating reporting journals about the atrocities that Napoleon's army was committing during this building of the Napoleonic French Empire. The entire world seemed like it was against Napoleon, making him the Hitler of the very early 1800s and making his war World War .5. In my mind anyway. The whole world was in turmoil. Well, in addition to Napoleon, you factor in the War of 1812 and how frightening that must have been for American citizens. Think about this horrible war. The British Canadian colonies were assaulting American borders from the north. The unmatched British Navy had set up blockades off the eastern coast, completely stopping American trade to any of the Old World. And the Native Americans had teamed up with Britain and were attacking American fortifications on the western border. America was getting assaulted from all directions by indigenous or invading forces, and the American settlers had no way of feeling safe or comfortable. This uneasy feeling was solidified in August of 1814 when Joseph was 8 years old, when the British Army was able to invade the American capital of Washington, D.C., take over and occupy and burn the Capitol building and the White House to the ground. With most wars, once an invading force takes over the capital of whatever territory they're invading, the war is usually over with a clear victor. In Joseph's mind, like the minds of almost every other American citizen, they probably felt like they were beaten by the Redcoats, and the American colonies had fallen back under the control of the British Empire. Once the capital falls, what else do you have? The phrase, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," starts to come to mind at this point. In World War II, when Hitler invaded Russia on the Ostfront, the Allies couldn't have been happier about it. Don't get me wrong, most people hated Joseph Stalin, but if he was the biggest threat to the equally evil Hitler, suddenly Stalin just didn't seem so bad. That's why, as the war was nearing closure, Soviet troops were riding around in American jeeps and shooting American bullets at the Nazis. Stalin may not have been an ally, but he was the enemy of Hitler, and that made him an overall positive force. Now, if you were somebody living in Poland or Belgium or France or any of the other countries that were railroaded by the Nazis, or conversely by the Soviets once they pushed the Nazis back, you probably wouldn't particularly like either of these militaries or heads of state. But for a third-party actor like America, Stalin was great because he posed the biggest threat to Hitler. The same situation happened with Napoleon. The early American colonies were at war with Britain as it was trying to reestablish its control over the early American settlements. Well, Britain was also waging a vicious war against Napoleon and devoting a lot of troops and resources to that fight. So Britain could either continue to focus on the American War of 1812 and spread itself thin enough for Napoleon to take over the British colonies, or it could forfeit this war of very little consequence on American soil and devote the bulk of British forces to fighting the tyrant known as Napoleon Bonaparte. Well, Britain chose the latter, and American militias were able to push back the few British forces and maintain the borders in the north against the British Canadians and in the west against the small forces of the Native Americans. A lot of people hated Napoleon, but for the early Americans, he was also a bit of a savior in disguise from the conquering British army, much like Stalin was with the Nazis in World War II. This war fascinates me so much. We're more than 200 years disconnected from it. But It can be seen as almost the predecessor to the First World War. With all the shifting political games and the wartime strategies and invasions that were taking place, the world was experiencing an almost World War .5, a mere 100 years before World War I actually kicked off. The world politics and how everything played out is endlessly fascinating today, and it has so much effect on how the world is shaped now. I can't seem to study it enough or learn enough about all of these wars, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of everything that actually happened. Hopefully, in listening to this episode, the listener, you are somewhat intrigued by the war that was happening in Joseph's young childhood, and maybe you'll be spurred to do a little bit of research on it because it's unbelievably fascinating. Now, think about how interested in World War .5 Joseph would have been. I mean, we've covered this. He was a smart guy, and he read a lot of books, and he had a little bit of formal education, and as was made apparent by his impressive handwriting and ability to write the Book of Mormon in the first place. I would wager to say that Joseph probably picked up any book he possibly could find relating to the war that was happening, or Napoleon, or any of the other world politics that were going on in his time. It's not like he had TV and could sit and watch the news reports of the world events. He had to seek them out in newspapers or books, and he did. Now that we understand the mindset Joseph was in, and we've hopefully empathized with him a little bit or took a stroll in his shoes for a minute, let's dive into the book that David and I just discussed. Well, for starters, it's perfect. It's exactly what we're looking for when we're positing the claim of a source text for the Book of Mormon. For one thing, it was very available to Joseph. The view of the Hebrews might not have been really readily available, or the first book of Napoleon required Joseph to have found the book in a bargain bin at a bookstore. But I mean, in opposition to those claims, the Late War of 1812 was a book used as a history textbook in schools. The book was published when Joseph was 11 years old in New York, geographically right next to Joseph. And it was used as a textbook in schools while Joseph would have been attending schools off and on during his childhood. I mean, a lot of books were published back then that didn't sell very well, and a lot of copies remain today in fairly good condition due to the lack of use. Well, this is not the case with the late war. We have a lot of copies of it, but most of them have bindings that aren't secure any longer, or they're missing lots of pages, or they have doodles in the margin or notes written on the pages, which means that these books were widely distributed and used by school children. And they were used a lot, opened and closed a lot, read and talked about and discussed and made notes on a lot. I mean, Joseph would have had very, very ready access to the late war during his early years as a dreamer and young prophet. Now, to understand this book, let's read the title page of it and see if we can glean any more exciting information about the book. I'm reading this from the archive.org scanned photocopy of the book, and a link for it will be in the show notes. The link includes the entire book for free, and I would recommend that anybody who's interested give it a read and let me know what you think about it. This is the title page of The Late War. It's called The Historical Reader, containing the late war between the United States and Great Britain from June 1812 to February 1815. Subtitled In the Scriptural Style. Altered and adapted for the use of schools throughout the United States. There is more on the title page, but nothing else is terribly pertinent, except for the fact that this was the third edition of the book published in 1819, the original having been published in 1816. That means that the book was popular enough to have 3 or more editions and be actively printed for more than 3 years. Those are the marks of a very, very popular book in that day and age, especially given the cost of printing a book. The main operative phrase that we're concerned with in that title page and that we're going to focus on is in the scriptural style. It's argued that this was done to motivate children to read the Bible just by familiarizing them with recent world events written in the biblical style. They thought that if the children read this book and liked what it told them about recent history, maybe they would like reading the Bible as a historical text, just like the late War of 1812. It even says on the title page that it is altered for the use of schools, so the author had a motivation behind writing the book with yeas and it came to passes and other Elizabethan English phrases and words, just like the Book of Mormon. Well, the Book of Mormon also has some things in it that are somewhat confusing. Well, there are a lot of those, and we'll talk about them soon. But some things are written in there, and it's like, why is that in there? One of these odd features is the Isaiah chapters, where there are extensive quotes from Isaiah, almost in apropos of nothing. Well, another of these confusing things is the war chapters. It seems like the book is offering some insights into the history of the people of the continent, then it just takes this weird turn for a few chapters, talking about war after battle after slaughter, and it seems so out of place. I mean, a believer might wonder why God thought it was necessary to include those parts. Well, if we look at the late war, we read about battle accounts of the Battle of New Orleans or the Battle of New York or the takeover of Washington, D.C., and how there were certain individuals that distinguished themselves during those battles. One of the most distinguished individuals was Andrew Jackson, who would later become the 7th president of the U.S. During the war chapters of the Book of Mormon, we read about a mighty leader named Captain Moroni and his conquests and battles. We read about the fortifications he built up to defend his cities and how he was fighting for the title of liberty, like the Constitution. And all of these seem to have some real-world analogs to some of the things Jackson is described as doing in the late war. Why would we see a parallel between the late war and the Book of Mormon with this Captain Moroni and Andrew Jackson? Well, this is one of many, many, many parallels that run deeper than just similar phrases that the statistical study pointed out, and they go as far as exposing similar ideas and content between the two books. So, as we can see and has been demonstrated, we can tell how deep the connections run between the late War of 1812 and the Book of Mormon. Well, the presentation that I've been taking most of this information from has much more data than I can present here, and that really backs up the claim that Joseph easily could have taken information from the late war in order to author the Book of Mormon. I really want to thank Chris and Dwayne Johnson for going to the trouble of conducting these studies under the umbrella of the Word Tree Foundation. Also, thank you, Chris, specifically for presenting the information in a very palpable and interesting, entertaining way. Like I said many times, I've watched the whole thing 3 times from start to finish, and I've watched some segments of it over a dozen times to try and absorb all the information. I implore every listener to watch that video, and I defy any true believing Mormon to watch the video and emerge on the other side still a believer. If I would have watched this as a believing Mormon, I don't think I would have been able to hold on to any semblance of belief in the Book of Mormon after digesting all the information in this video. Seriously, watch it. There will be a link in the show notes for it, and it's called How the Book of Mormon Destroyed Mormonism, presented in 2013 by Chris Johnson. All right, let's talk about a few arguments that are commonly used by apologists to claim that the Book of Mormon is legitimately translated by Joseph Smith from an ancient history of Jesus in the Americas. Well, one of the biggest arguments you hear for the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon is the argument from chiasmus. Now, that might be a weird word, but in order to understand this argument, we need to know what chiasmus is. Well, it's a literary device. Anybody that's presenting information should follow a certain proven successful pattern. The pattern usually goes as follows. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. It's a storytelling or information conveyance technique, and it's extremely effective. When something falls into the category of chiasmus, it starts with an idea, comes to the conclusion halfway through the given chiastic pair, and then ends by coming back to the idea that was originally proposed. Good chiasmus can be used as a strong storytelling device, and it's the mark of an educated author, or just an author with some kind of higher comprehension of effective information transmission. This episode started 24 pages of script ago talking about Napoleon in the War of 1812, and we're just now wrapping up its influence on the Book of Mormon. This episode is way deep into a massive chiasmus to explain the origin of the Book of Mormon. Well, when it comes to textual criticism, chiasmus is something that can easily be identified by people that study it all day. Where it comes into effect with the Book of Mormon is positing the claim that Joseph couldn't have known what chiasmus is. Therefore, if there are any chiastic pairs in the Book of Mormon, it proves that he couldn't have written it. Well, this is just an argument from ignorance. Chiasmus is a storytelling device that humans use in everyday conversation. I mean, think about this for a second. When you tell your friend or significant other about how your day went, you usually start with the most exciting thing that happened. You might start out by telling them that you were walking to work and you saw a person get pulled over by the cops. The cops jumped out of their cars, pulled their guns on the person in the other car. The cops arrested the person, got back in their cars, and drove away, and you went back to walking to work. This little story composed a 4-pair deep chiasmus because it's a logical way to tell a story. Arguing that the Book of Mormon is full of chiasmus, proving the fact that Joseph couldn't have written it, completely ignores how prevalent chiasmus is in our everyday lives and in most things we read and write. People that make this argument may also say that the abundance of chiasmus in the Book of Mormon implies that the reader was quite learned in storytelling and prose, and it dates the plates back to ancient Hebrew times. The Bible is teeming with chiasmus, as is the Quran and many other ancient religious texts, and this lends credibility to the Book of Mormon. Well, let's look at the formal argument being made by believing Mormons when it comes to chiasmus. A quick Google search of the word chiasmus will bring up chiasmus in the Book of Mormon as the top 10 search results. The first link is to an Ensign article. The second is to an article of the first believing Mormon textual critic that found chiastic structure in the Book of Mormon. The third is an article on utlm.org, which is considered an anti-Mormon website, which is filled to the brim with useful information. Finally, the fourth link is to fairmormon.org, the officially unofficial Mormon apologist website. I like to take a lot of information from this website because I like to see proper refutations of any common anti-Mormon arguments to see which side has the most merit or which argument makes the most sense. So let's look at the Fair Mormon article about chiasmus and see what it says. There will be a link to the article in the show notes for anybody that wishes to check out the Mormon apologist argument in its formal rendition. Chiasmus are also called Hebraisms because they are rife throughout the Hebrew Torah and Old Testament of the Bible. The claim is applied that if the Book of Mormon has chiastic or Hebraic structure, then it is obviously of Semitic origins and proves that it is indeed ancient. Let's see if we agree with it. The article starts off describing chiasmus with a very simple limerick that a lot of people have heard before. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse run up the clock. The clock struck 1, the mouse ran down, hickory dickory dock. That was a very, very simple 2-pair chiasmus, and it's easy to understand what is meant by chiasmus, so we can identify the literary structure and compare it to other texts like the Book of Mormon. This is a line taken directly from the Fair Mormon article in making the argument from chiastic structure. Quote, "The hickory-dickory dock theory would seem to be a straw man. Some simple examples do exist in the Book of Mormon, but they are not the most impressive ones. Critics try to pretend that the simple, trivial parallelisms represent all such chiastic samples in the Book of Mormon. If Joseph Smith was writing the Book of Mormon himself, he might well compose simple parallelisms intentionally or even accidentally. Small, trivial chiastic structures containing only a few elements might well arise through chance or English rhetoric, especially when other elements within the text are not considered in the analysis. However, Critics ignored numerous, complex, subtle, and meaningful chiasmus when they assume that all of the Book of Mormon's inverted parallel structures are so simple. On the other hand, more work needs to be done to evaluate the hundreds of proposed chiastic readings of the Book of Mormon. Some of them will inevitably end up as less likely than others, though statistical analysis has sustained the presence of some Book of Mormon chiasmus and failed to support it in some of Joseph's modern writings. And for LDS members, the value of these readings is less about demonstrating historicity in the text and more about interpreting the text with the intentions of the authors in mind, as viewed through their use of rhetorical figures. End quote. So, let's try and decipher this because it's quite fascinating. The closing line of that excerpt even says that chiastic studies of the Book of Mormon are not used to demonstrate the historicity of the text, and are more about interpreting the text through the eyes of the various authors. We'll talk about the authorship and stylistic drift soon, but let's wrap up talking about chiasmus in the Book of Mormon first. As we can tell, creating a chiasmus is not hard. I mean, it can be done with a limerick of 20 words like Hickory Dickory Dock, or it can be used as a major storytelling device that spans 26 pages worth of podcasting script. It merely implies sophistication of authorship, not ancient origin. If chiasmus can be used as an argument for sophisticated authorship of the Book of Mormon, we would expect the book to be overflowing with deep and impressive chiastic pairs that span entire chapters or even multiple books. Well, we just don't find that in the Book of Mormon. In fact, the Fair Mormon article only cites 6 blatant chiastic pairs or Hebraisms that are accepted by most literary scholars, believers or otherwise. The article claims that there are hundreds, but it fails to provide these examples with any level of detail or scholarship. Well, if the Book of Mormon was written by a sophisticated author that employed chiasmus heavily for compelling storytelling, we would expect it to stand out by sheer number or depth of chiastic pairs. Well, let's compare it to the first book of Napoleon for fun. Now remember, as far as we can tell, the first book of Napoleon was written by a 14-year-old that hated Napoleon. The foreword of the book basically tells everybody how horrible Napoleon is. The author used a pseudonym called Eliakim, kind of similar to Elohim if you ask me, but the foreword is addressed to various people that might read the book. One of the subsections is addressed to Napoleon himself and goes as follows, quote, Napoleon, if peradventure this little volume should ever reach thee, may its truths sink deep into thine heart, and remember in the midst of the torrents of blood thy guilty ambition is shedding, and the ruin and desolation it is spreading far and wide, that thou art a mortal man, and one day, perhaps ere long, thy soul shall be required of thee, and an account of all thy deeds, by that omnipotent, unerring and upright being, who, as he made and governeth, so in like all manner shall he judge the world. End quote. I mean, the writing is fairly impressive. I mean, especially for a 14-year-old. It's fairly sophisticated, but let's examine it. Are there any chiastic pairs in the first book of Napoleon? Well, it turns out that there are. In fact, a 14-pair deep chiasmus is found spanning chapters 20 and 21. But that's just a minor example. There's a 21-pair deep chiasmus that spans chapters 10 and 11 that convey a very impressive and sophisticated idea talking about naval battles. Nothing like this is presented in the Book of Mormon. This 14-year-old author of the first book of Napoleon is more literarily sophisticated than Joseph Smith by simple criterion of chiastic structure. It's not just the first book of Napoleon that has this chiasmus. It's present at some level in almost all books that undergo scrupulous literary study. In fact, if we compare chiasmus in the Book of Mormon to a bunch of other books that were popular during the time, it scores quite low on the scale. Very low, actually. These are all books that have a remarkable amount more chiasmus than the Book of Mormon, and only a few of them are actually of Semitic origins. This is a list of books: Warren's History of the Revolutionary War, Manuscript Story, The View of the Hebrews, Late War of 1812, Common Sense, Alice in Wonderland, Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Sense and Sensibility, A Tale of Two Cities, The Iliad of Homer, Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, the Apocryphal Books of the Bible. I mean, the list goes on, and every one of those books has a considerable amount more chiasmus than the Book of Mormon, rendering the argument posited by Fair Mormon that chiasmus proves the Book of Mormon true completely absurd. All right, now that we've put the chiasmus argument to sleep forever, let's talk about stylistic drift. It is often argued that the writing style spanning across the books inside the Book of Mormon prove that it was written by multiple different authors. Well, this is an argument from ignorance, and I'm going to have to construct it from the Mormon perspective before we can refute or substantiate the argument. Let's talk about the Bible for a second. It's claimed that the book was written by 43 authors over the span of almost 1,500 years, recorded in 3 different languages, all about the same topic, so that means it's true. While the number of authors, as well as the actual dates of the manuscripts, can be argued endlessly, it is true that the Bible is indeed an ancient book, with a significant amount of history contained in the text. It's also true that there were a lot of different authors that composed the books that are contained in the Bible. I mean, even Isaiah is thought to be written by 2 or 3 authors, which is something we'll get into soon. We know this by where they came from, who the books were reportedly written by, and of course by the different writing style of the different authors. I write this podcast in a different way than anybody else writes any other book or podcast about the Mormon Church. But I'm still conveying topics that have been discussed by other people. The difference is in the writing style, and it has a lot to do with what the writer is experiencing at the time or their level of education. I mean, supposedly all of Jesus' disciples were illiterate Aramaic-speaking fishermen, but all of the Gospels were originally written in Greek, the official language of the time. Well, the story of Jesus is recorded differently by the different authors that knew the story of Jesus the Nazarene. That's how we know a manuscript is from the Gospel of Mark, Luke, Matthew, or John, or an unknown manuscript that some biblical scholars call Q. It's all about focusing on the writing style and the phrasing of information as it differs between authors. Well, some very crazy unscholarly people will try and make the argument that somebody like Flavius Josephus wrote all of the Gospels, which is an absolute absurdity, given the different writing styles in the texts. Josephus was alive during the time that the Gospels were supposedly starting to be circulated, but if we say that he wrote all of them, it comes in direct conflict with the theory of different authors for the composition of the Bible. If one person were to have written all of the Gospels, they would all read very similar with certain catchphrases or unique words that only Josephus wrote, but that simply isn't the case. That leads scholars to believe that the Bible was written by multiple different authors over a large span of time, which is perfectly logical. Well, let's apply this same skepticism and scholarship to the Book of Mormon. As it is claimed, the Book of Mormon is an abridgment of multiple books written on thousands of different metal plates by multiple historians over a span of 2,900 years. Even being abridged by the same author, we should be able to pick up some major differences between the books in the Book of Mormon regarding phrasing or terminology. Abridged doesn't mean rewritten. Abridged merely means shortened without losing the content or main themes. The original writers of the books in the Book of Mormon should show through the abridgment. What's more than that, in the books written by the abridgers themselves, which were namely the Words of Mormon and Mormon, they're both very, very small books inside the larger Book of Mormon, we should be able to see a noticeable and marked difference between the writers of those 2 little books, as opposed to the larger books inside the Book of Mormon that were merely abridged by Moroni or Mormon. Now, given what we understand about the difference in authorship of books inside the Book of Mormon, how does it stand up to actual textual criticism based on this criterion? Well, it does stand up. That's what's so remarkable about it. When we look at the difference in authorship style from 1 Nephi to Omni and from Mosiah to Ether to Mormon, it looks almost as if the Book of Mormon was indeed written by different authors when we examine it cover to cover like this. Well, the problem with that is the operative phrase cover to cover. When we look at the writing style in the Book of Mormon from front cover to back cover, there are some significant differences in the authorship, but that doesn't take into account the actual authorship timeline chronologically, which puts different books in the Book of Mormon as being written by Joseph in a completely different order than they are set in the Book of Mormon. We covered this earlier, but let's put a pin in it for a second. Let's put this idea of different authorship in the Book of Mormon on the back burner, and we'll bring it back in just a second. But before we continue talking about how the Book of Mormon rates in this statistical study, we need to discuss stylistic drift. If you listen back to the first episodes of this podcast, you will notice a drastic change in comparison to this episode. Most podcasters hate listening to their first episodes because they don't want to know how bad those episodes were in comparison to their more current episodes. Well, that's because the longer that podcasters write or broadcast, the more we drift away from the first few episodes. I mean, as we grow and learn more and produce more shows that are better in quality and content, we find things that are successful and stick with them, and identify things that aren't successful and get rid of them. Like I said, if you compare this show from 1 year ago to the quality of it now, hopefully there's a bit of a difference there. Well, that's known as stylistic drift. All authors or reporters or storytellers experience this same phenomenon the longer they continually produce writings, or in this case, of course, podcasts. The thing about stylistic drift is it's a fairly newly studied thing in textual criticism. The idea has prevailed for a long time, but only with large statistical studies are we able to identify the drifting and, of course, graph its presence on a statistical plane. So how does stylistic drift factor into different authors of the Book of Mormon? We said that we were going to put that on the back burner, but let's bring it back to the front. And, let's try and stir it around a little bit with the pan that we just made full of stylistic drift. Well, for the most of the time that the Book of Mormon has been around, scholars have understood it to have been written in the same order as the books are presently in. Most Mormons believe that Joseph began translating with Oliver Cowdery on May 6, 1829, with 1 Nephi, and then finished with Moroni's promise in the Book of Moroni. Well, that chronology of authorship is just wrong. We went through the authorship timeline earlier. When Oliver Cowdery showed up, they wrote from Mosiah to 4th Nephi, wrote the interim Book of Mormon, which is a small book inside the actual Book of Mormon, that's written after 4th Nephi. Then they moved on to Ether and Moroni. Then they went all the way back to 1st Nephi and wrote all the books up to Omni. Then they finally wrote the books called Words of Mormon to bridge the gap between Omni and Mosiah. Just a little bit of a refresher there. When the books are put into the statistical study in the correct order to look for authorship as opposed to stylistic drift, guess what? It comes out of the computer just like we expect it to. It turns out the naturalistic authorship theory of Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon predicted the stylistic drift, and when it's put into the computer in the right order of authorship, it does exactly as expected. When we look at a graph that plots the suggested statistical line of stylistic drift in authorship, we see that the Book of Mormon falls right into line with what we see with thousands of other books that are put through this same study of textual criticism. The Book of Mormon had stylistic drift, but it didn't come from more than one author. Joseph Smith was the author of the Book of Mormon. We can conclude that. All in all, just like this podcast has changed over a year's time but has been written and produced by one person, the Book of Mormon changed over time in the exact same way, and we can plot that data on a graph. So, to answer the apologetic that is asserted, saying that the Book of Mormon was written by different authors. That's only if you alter the order of books when you input the Book of Mormon data into this study. If you look at it chronologically, as being written by Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon differences in authorship fall perfectly in line with very average stylistic drift of one author over time. If any apologist ever tries to assert the different authorship theory as proof of the Book of Mormon origins, it can easily be shut down by making the data align with the actual timeline of authorship, as opposed to how it's studied from front cover to back cover like most apologists or believing members study the book. Alright, we've devoted a lot of time to talking about the time leading up to the Book of Mormon, and then we had even more fun talking about the authorship of the Book of Mormon. Given the evidence at hand, I no longer espouse myself with the Spalding theory. Although there seems to be a bit of a connection there, given all the ancillary evidence surrounding the connections of Sidney Rigdon to Joseph Smith before the Book of Mormon was published, given the evidence at hand, I no longer espouse myself with the Spalding theory, even though there does seem to be a bit of connection there. I mean, given all the ancillary evidence surrounding the connection of Sidney Rigdon to Joseph Smith before, the Book of Mormon was published. So when we try to assert the Spalding argument, it just falls apart because of the hearsay and the lack of hard evidence. We can assert the Spalding theory until we're blue in the face. Well, we can say that Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon teamed up to plagiarize Spalding's manuscript found and turn it into the Book of Mormon, but there just isn't enough evidence for it, and any Mormon that knows the history will scoff at the assertion. All in all, if we stick to the Spalding theory, it's almost like looking at the history surrounding the Book of Mormon through an old black and white television that's mostly just static. Science and computing have brought us tools that allow us to see that history in 4K high definition using statistical studies and modern analysis. Why would we be messing with the bunny ears on the old television in our parents' basement trying to see a boob when there's mountains of high definition porn there at the click of a button? Why would we assert the tired old, inept, unfounded Spalding authorship theory when we have all of these other books that are way more likely to be source texts for the Book of Mormon? We have a strong case built up against the Book of Mormon based on the authorship alone, compared against the claims of where it supposedly came from. We don't need to rely on Solomon Spalding. So we've discussed so much about authorship theories, but the best part about all of these confusing and these tiresome statistical studies that we pour hours into, none of them are necessary to refute the Book of Mormon. I mean, yes, granted, these studies and tools offer us a lot of details, and, they help to point our path of research in the right direction and point out books that we weren't aware of before. But if we've learned anything today, it's that the Book of Mormon could very well have been authored by Joseph Smith, just based on statistical research and rigorous textual studies. Earlier, it was mentioned that it would take a single person about 240,000 years to do the study that these computers did in a matter of hours. Joseph Smith never could have predicted that people would be able to study his work like this and call him out on it like we can today. The Book of Mormon doesn't have much to stand on anymore, but let's give it a break. I'm serious. Let's grant everything about the Book of Mormon that is claimed by the church and Joseph Smith, the author. Let's allow the argument to progress and examine what's in the book. Let's ignore all of these convoluted statistical studies and look at just the content and claims of the book. We opened our study today with the introduction of 3 categories to deconstruct the Book of Mormon. We started off with talking about all of the historical context and events that were going on around Joseph Smith during his very formative years. The historical context had a huge impact on what Joseph read and subsequently what made it into the Book of Mormon. Then we moved into the category of authorship of the Book of Mormon. We talked about all the different books that Joseph had access to leading up to publishing the Book of Mormon. We talked about all the various authorship theories and how well they rank with this rigorous study conducted by the Word Tree Foundation, all based off of statistics and word counts. Of course, You can find this presentation that I'm referring to on YouTube under the name How the Book of Mormon Destroyed Mormonism by Chris Johnson. I've said this many times in this episode. I'm going to say it again. I highly, highly recommend this video. He does a much better job of presenting than I ever could in an audio format. These authorship theories ranged from the least significant of the Pride and Prejudice with a score of 83.8, which was really close to the baseline of 85, and among tens of thousands of other books. And the other end of the spectrum ranged all the way up to the First Book of Napoleon and the Late War of 1812 that received unbelievable scores of 22.3 and 17.4 respectively in this statistical study. So, given the parameters of this study, it's basically conclusive that these books had some role in the authorship of the Book of Mormon, and that the Book of Mormon wasn't from ancient historians that scratched it into metal plates for Joseph Smith to translate later. Well, for the purpose of this final segment, we're going to ignore all of those problems with the authorship of the Book of Mormon and the historical context that surrounded Joseph Smith in the time that the Book of Mormon came out, and we're going to meet it on a false even plane. We're going to move into the third category that divides up our show today, and that's the content and claims category. So, for the purpose of this point of argumentation, let's grant everything that the Mormon Church and Joseph Smith claimed about the Book of Mormon itself. Let's just talk about what's inside the Book of Mormon. Before starting this segment of Book of Mormon analysis, we need to understand the term anachronism. A lot of people know what this means, a lot of people think they know what this means, and many more don't have a single clue about this word. An anachronism is a criteria used in textual or historical studies to date a certain work. For example, if a person claims that a book is written in 1950, yet we see the phrase Millennium Falcon in the text, we have a problem. The Millennium Falcon, as we know it, didn't exist until George Lucas conceptualized it in 1977, which dates that book to being written sometime after 1977. So there's an anachronistic dating of 27-year difference there. Let's take that word anachronism to an extreme. If we're studying ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, and we see engraved in the mural a McDonald's logo, and the pharaohs are worshiping it, it's going to raise some suspicion as to how it got there. Did the Egyptians know about the rise of the McDonald's empire, or did somebody come in and create that mural at a much later date and merely claim that it's authentic? Well, anachronisms are going to play into our study a lot, but for now we need to talk about Joseph Smith. Nephi. This ties into the authorship of the Book of Mormon, but we're going to focus on the content that's in it. Earlier I said that the small plates, which are First Nephi up to Omni, had the most occurrences of autobiographical tendencies. Well, when a person is writing a fictional story, they tend to include things they've experienced in their own lives, and put their protagonist through similar situations that they've experienced, especially if they're really inexperienced authors. If Joseph Smith indeed wrote the Book of Mormon, we might expect to see these autobiographical tendencies occasionally peppered throughout the text. If the book is genuinely ancient, as it is claimed, we would never ever see anything like this. Well, what do the facts say? Listen to some rapid-fire examples and think about it. Maybe there's a connection here, maybe not. You be the judge. Like I said, we're meeting the Book of Mormon on a false even plane here. In the Book of Mormon, the first few books focus on the hero of our story, Nephi, who is the son of Lehi. They are a Hebrew family that flees Jerusalem around 650 BCE, and Nephi is the fourth son of Lehi, just as Joseph Smith Jr. is the fourth son of Joseph Smith Sr. And Joseph had a sibling named Samuel, and Nephi had a sibling named Samuel. This is 1 Nephi chapter 2, verse 5, quote, "And he came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea, and he traveled in the wilderness in the borders which are nearer the Red Sea. And he did travel in the wilderness with his family, which consisted of my mother Sariah, and my elder brothers who were Laman, Lemuel, and Sam." End quote. Now, we also have that one of Lehi's sons was named Joseph, and one of Joseph Smith Jr.'s sons is named Joseph. Both were born in the woods. This is 1 Nephi 18, verse 7. Quote, "And now my father had begat 2 sons in the wilderness. The elder was called Jacob, and the younger Joseph." End quote. Next, we have Joseph claims to have been visited by the Lord as a teenager, and of course, Mormon claims to be visited by the Lord at age 15. Beyond that, the connection is also made that Mormon is called to remove the plates from the ground at the age 24, and Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon at the age 24. This is Mormon, chapter 1, verse 3 through 4. Quote, "Therefore, when ye are about 24 years old, I would that ye should remember that the things which ye have observed concerning this people. And when ye are of that age, go to the land Antum, unto a hill which shall be called Shim. And there have I deposited unto the Lord all the sacred engravings concerning this people." Kind of sounds similar to what happened with Joseph. "And behold, ye shall take the plates of Nephi unto yourself. And the remainder shall ye leave in the place where they are, and ye shall engrave on the plates of Nephi all the things that ye have observed concerning this people." End quote. Next off, we have Joseph Smith is looking for things that are hidden in the earth, but he can't obtain them because they keep slipping away. And the ancient inhabitants, of course, in Joseph Smith's book, start hiding treasures in the earth. Also, there's a connection made between Gadianton robbers, which are basically a gang or a fraternity, and of course, to Joseph Smith, the Freemasons were basically a gang or a fraternity. This is Mormon chapter 1, verse 18. Quote, "And these Gadianton robbers who were among the Lamanites did infest the land, insomuch that the inhabitants thereof began to hide up their treasures in the earth. And they became slippery, because the Lord had cursed the land, that they could not hold them or retain them again." End quote. I mean, seriously, if you've listened to this show, there's been plenty of examples of Joseph Smith digging for treasure where the treasure just sunk into the ground, or the ground gnomes took him further away from him, so he couldn't obtain the treasure. Next connection is we have Ethan Smith is an author of a book that precedes the Book of Mormon, which was The View of the Hebrews. And then, of course, Ether is the author of some plates that precede the golden plates. This is taken from Ether, chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. Quote, "And now I, Moroni, proceed to give an account of those ancient inhabitants who were destroyed by the hand of the Lord upon the face of this north country. And I take mine account from the 24 plates which were found by the people of Limhi, which is called the Book of Ether. And as I suppose that the first part of this record, which speaks concerning the creation of this world, and also of Adam, and an account from that time even to the great tower, and whatsoever things transpired among the children of men until that time, is had among the Jews." End quote. The next parallel we have, Joseph Smith Jr. and Joseph Smith Sr. were the primary participants in the Smith family when it came to magic and folklore. Joseph Smith Jr. was more of a fan of a rock in the hat trick, while his dad was more privy to divining rods, which were 19th century metal detectors or water finders, but were actually just a couple of witch hazel sticks that Joseph Smith Sr. held in his hands. This is the person that Joseph learned folk practices from, his father. Well, Joseph Jr. liked having his spherical rock that led him to whatever he desired most, and of course it only worked based on how much he believes in the rock and is faithful to it. Well, one morning in the wilderness, Lehi, who was Nephi's father, walks out of his tent and finds a ball of brass with spindles on it that point to where they need to go. This is taken from 1 Nephi 16, 9 through 10. Quote, "And it came to pass that the voice of the Lord spake unto my father by night, and commanded him that on the morrow he should take his journey into the wilderness. And it came to pass that as my father arose in the morning, and went forth to the tent door, to his great astonishment he beheld upon the ground a round ball of curious workmanship, and it was of fine brass. And within the ball were 2 spindles, and the one pointed the way whither we should go into the wilderness." End quote. Later on, it calls this ball with 2 spindles a compass, or also its formal name, the Liahona. Just keep that in mind. Also, think about this for just a second. This brass ball with 2 spindles in it was almost a combination of Joseph's and his dad's favorite magic trinkets. It was a ball with words that would appear, which Joseph Jr. liked to use in his hat to translate the Book of Mormon or to search for treasure, and also the ball had 2 spindles on it, kind of like the sticks that would point Joseph Sr. to where he needed to go to find treasure or do whatever he did with his various magic techniques. The parallels with this Liahona get much deeper, so stay with me. When Lehi's family was wandering through the wilderness, Nephi used the Liahona, the success of which was contingent upon his righteousness. Nephi ended up being righteous enough, and he was led to a place where he could hunt some game to feed his family with the only remaining bow that worked among all of Nephi's brothers. This might just be seen as a parallel that Joseph makes for himself in his own dictated History of the Church, Volume 7, page 343. Quote, I brought salvation to my father's house as an instrument in the hands of God when they were in a miserable situation. End quote. You have to understand what we talked about earlier. The Smith family was perpetually destitute while Joseph was growing up. They lived in complete squalor after Joseph Smith Sr. lost what little the family had on the overseas ginseng business deal. Joseph felt like publishing the Book of Mormon was what saved his family from complete destitution. And the saddest part of that, he was right. I mean, I don't know, call me crazy, but I personally think that it would be justifiable in Joseph's mind to do everything that he did if it meant saving his family and lifting them out of poverty. They had a very strong sense of family. I mean, think about that. Doesn't it add an extra layer to this whole thing? I mean, let's try to take a step back in Joseph's shoes again. He never had the opportunity for sustained education, and the family barely had the means to survive on most days. Undoubtedly, there were definitely a lot of nights where his brothers and sisters would go to sleep crying from being hungry. A family with 11 people is really hard to sustain. That's a lot of humans that need a lot of calories to survive. And they had that because they survived, but they probably didn't have much more. I mean, all of their clothes were handmade, and they were all hand-me-downs from the oldest siblings. They almost never had money for treats or toys or books. I mean, Joseph was a brilliant child, and he craved knowledge. He sought out ways to help him and the family survive no matter what it took. He studied the art of deception and cold reading, even if it was just self-taught through trial and error. Any book that Joseph could get his hands on, he would probably read dozens of times just for sheer lack of any other books being available to him. As a young boy, Joseph started going to religious revivals and seeing these charismatic preachers that would ride around in last year's model of A.S. Flandreau Coupe Rockaway with $100 suits looking sharp as the devil. Joseph would see how successful these people were and how much money was in the collection basket that was passed around at the end of all of these sermons. Joseph would envy these men for their magnetic personalities, and would wish himself to be in their possession, accepted and loved by this many people giving him money. Joseph knew that he could do it for himself, and he could become just as successful as the men he had seen tour the burned-over district, preaching their own interpretations of the Bible or just Christianity in general. Well, Joseph could only see all of this success for so long before he would finally make a go at it for himself. He wanted to lift his family out of poverty, basically being their savior, and starting the next hit religion was a great way to do it. If we look at how well off the Smith family was at the time Joseph dictated what we just read out of the history of the church, they were much better off. I mean, Joseph did indeed save his family in a time of desperation. Or, as Joseph put it, he brought salvation to the home when they were in a miserable situation. It almost makes you feel bad for Joseph. I mean, yes, he could have pulled himself up by the bootstraps and started working for manual labor for a decent living wage, but that just wasn't his personality type, and he never learned that level of character from Joseph Sr., his dad, who was consistently out of the way with alcohol and was probably quite abusive, or at best, neglectful. Think about the situation that Joseph and the Smith family were perpetually in while we talk about some more possible autobiographical features in the Book of Mormon. Think about how much Joseph must have wanted to pull his family out of this hole of poverty with the tricks of his only known trade. We know that Joseph Smith was a dreamer, and he was convicted of being a disorderly person in 1826. It's probably fair to say that this trial and conviction put a little bit of strain on the Smith family, and it seems to shine through the Book of Mormon a little bit in 1 Nephi 16:38. Remember, Laman and Lemuel in the Book of Mormon were direct analogs to Hiram and Alvin in Joseph's life. That plays an important role in understanding this verse. This is 1 Nephi chapter 16, verse 37. Quote, "And Laman said unto Lemuel, and also to the sons of Ishmael, Behold, let us slay our father and also our brother Nephi, who has taken it upon him to be our ruler and our teacher, who are his elder brethren. Now he says that the Lord has talked with him, and also that angels have ministered unto him. But behold, we know that he lies unto us. And he tells us these things, and he worketh many things by his cunning arts, that he may deceive our eyes, thinking, perhaps, that he may lead us away into some strange wilderness. And after he has led us away, he has thought to make himself a king and a ruler over us, that he may do with us according to his will and pleasure. And after this manner did my brother Laman stir up their hearts to anger." End quote. There's a couple of key phrases in that passage. Quote, "He says that the Lord talked with him, and that angels have ministered unto him, but we know that he lies unto us." End quote. The next one is, quote, "And he worketh many things by his cunning arts, that he may deceive our eyes." End quote. Just think about those two phrases. When Joseph was convicted of being a glass looker in 1826, 3 years before he wrote this, in South Bainbridge, there were a few charges that were thrown against the wall to see what would stick. One of these was being a disorderly person, which was kind of a catch-all legal phrase that they could use to arrest vagrants or drunkards or just anybody that was disrupting the peace in any way. One of the subcategories in the disorderly person charge is one who practices crafty science. Nephi was lying to Laman and Lemuel using his cunning arts. Joseph was lying to Alvin and Hiram using crafty science. Cunning arts? Crafty science? Interesting. Next we have Nephi lied to his brothers Laman and Lemuel about speaking with God and the ministering of angels. And on the flip side, we have Joseph lied to his brothers Hiram and Alvin that God talked with him and that the angel Nephi had descended over his head in the middle of the night. Now, maybe there's a connection there, maybe not, but it's just one more thing that could be attributed to being autobiographical from the mind of Joseph Smith that made it into the pages of the Book of Mormon. The next parallel we talk about might be referring to Joseph Smith and making a set of plates for people to see and handle. The Nephi analog talks about him building a ship as opposed to a set of plates and how his brothers opposed the idea. This is taken from 1 Nephi 17 through 20. All you need to do is change the word ship for a set of plates and Nephi for Joseph, and the whole thing makes a lot of sense given the context of the situation Joseph was enduring. This is 1 Nephi chapter 17, verse 17 through 20. Quote, "And when my brethren saw that I was about to build a ship," or a set of plates, "they began to murmur against me, saying, Our brother is a fool, for he thinketh that he can build a ship," or a set of plates, "yea, and he also thinketh that he can cross these great waters. And thus my brethren did complain against me, and were desirous that they might not labor, for they did not believe that I could build a ship, or set of plates, neither would they believe that I was instructed of the Lord. And now it came to pass that I, Nephi, was exceedingly sorrowful because of the hardness of their hearts. And now when they saw that I began to be sorrowful, they were glad in their hearts, insomuch that they did rejoice over me, saying, We knew that ye could not construct a ship, or set of plates, for we knew that ye were lacking in judgment. Wherefore thou canst not accomplish so great a work. And thou art like unto our father, led away by the foolish imaginations of his heart. Think about Joseph Smith Sr. there. That's amazing. Yea, he hath led us out of the land of Jerusalem, or Vermont, and we have wandered in the wilderness for these many years. And our women have toiled, being big with child, and they have borne children in the wilderness, and suffered all things, save it were death. And it would have been better that they had died before they came out of Jerusalem than to have suffered these afflictions. End quote. I mean, this is just one more thing that could be a parallel. None of these are definitively autobiographical, but once you start to see a preponderance of these same themes in the Book of Mormon, it's kind of hard to ignore them. There's one more connection to make regarding Joseph Smith and Nephi. In light of how much both of our heroes' brothers hated them, we get a sense of the bullying that was taking place for Nephi and for Joseph. Just as elder brothers often do, Laman and Lemuel were making fun of Nephi because he was claiming he could build a ship or a set of plates, but they thought he was crazy. So God grants Nephi a superpower to help with his bullying older brothers. Just get this, all right? This is in 1 Nephi chapter 17, verse 52 through 54. Quote, And it came to pass that I, Nephi, or Joseph, said many things unto my brethren, insomuch that they were confounded and could not contend against me. Neither durst they lay their hands upon me, nor touch me with their fingers, even for the space of many days. Now they durst not do this, lest they should wither before me. So powerful was the Spirit of God, and thus it had wrought upon them. And it came to pass that the Lord said unto me, Stretch forth thy hand again unto thy brethren, and they shall not wither before me, but I will shock them, saith the Lord. And this will I do, that they may know that I am the Lord their God. And it came to pass that I stretched forth my hand unto my brethren, and they did not wither before me, but the Lord did shake them, even according to the word which he had spoken. End quote. Now, I remember being a young kid and wishing that every time the school bully got around me or touched me, it would shock or kill him. How great would it be if God safeguarded every single nerd from being bullied by giving them superpowers? Well, that's exactly how Joseph saw the protection that God gave him, or at least it's what he wished for so hard that he might have thought he could actually do it. I mean, it's all a product of Joseph hating his life so much that he was able to create this alternate reality that he could live vicariously through. And it seems like that's what we're reading with these passages that are so autobiographical in the Book of Mormon. There is one more autobiographical thing to talk about, and that's Joseph Smith's mother's memoir. There is a book written by Lucy Mack Smith titled Biographical Sketches of Joseph Smith, the Prophet, and His Progenitors for Many Generations, and it was published in 1853. In this book, Lucy is kind enough to let us in on the Smith family a little bit. This is our main source for understanding the reality of the Smith family, as well as some of their many tribulations as a destitute family with an alcoholic father figure to rule the house. It details some of the arguments that were had in the Smith family about religiosity, which Lucy believed in, versus a vague belief in a deistic God, which Joseph Sr. had, and passed on to the young Joseph. Well, there are a couple of parts from the book that we need to read to see if we can understand some final autobiographical tones in the Book of Mormon. This is an excerpt taken directly from an article on UTLM, and it details some of the early life occurrences in the Smith family. Quote, according to Lucy Smith, her husband, Joseph Smith Sr., had a number of dreams or visions prior to Joseph's visions. LDS historian Richard Bushman noted, in many of the dreams, Joseph Sr. found himself alone, decrepit, or ill, or on a vaguely defined quest. In one, he traveled alone in the desolate world on a road so broad and barren that I wondered why I should travel in it. In another, he was in a gloomy desert amidst the most death-like silence. Usually, the desolation was followed by redemption, a flower-filled garden, or the fruit of an exceedingly handsome tree representing the love of God. One of the father's visions in 1811 seems to be the inspiration for a section in the Book of Mormon. As Lucy recounted, Joseph Smith Sr. described seeing both a broad and a narrow path. Upon entering the narrow path, he came to a stream of water, then a tree bearing white fruit. After tasting the fruit, he tried to persuade his family to partake as well. He then saw a great building filled with finely dressed people, mocking those who partook of the fruit. This should be compared with 1 Nephi 8 through 11:36, where we read of Lehi and Nephi's vision of the tree of life. They describe seeing a river, a narrow path, a tree bearing white fruit, and a building full of finely dressed people who mock those who partake of the fruit. End quote. That was all taken from LDS historian Richard Bushman's study of the Book of Mormon versus Lucy Mack Smith's book. Think about that. Does that little dream that Joseph Smith Sr. had sound familiar at all? I mean, this is something that's taught to Mormons from a very, very young age about the vision of the tree of life that Nephi had. I mean, originally Lehi had this dream, and then Nephi prayed to the Lord so that he could see the vision also, because he wanted to see the dream that his father saw in order to understand and interpret it in his own way. I mean, does it sound like it could be the source of the vision in 1 Nephi chapter 8? Let's bring in one more of these examples from the same UTLM or article, and it's taken directly from Lucy's own memoir, with a sentence preceding it. Quote, Joseph Smith was intrigued with the stories of the earliest inhabitants of the New World, and it can be seen in Lucy Smith's memoirs. She noted Joseph's storytelling ability and interest in the Indians. Quote, this is now quoting Lucy Smith's memoir. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of travel, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life with them. End quote. So apparently, according to this passage from Lucy's own book, she remembers Joseph acting out or telling stories about the ancient inhabitants of this continent. To be perfectly clear, this was talking about when Joseph was a young boy becoming a young man. A long, long time before the Book of Mormon was even a concept floating around in Joseph's mind. If all of this just isn't enough to make the case of Joseph's early autobiographical influences on the Book of Mormon clear, and you want to find further information and research about these connections, then check out the book Inside the Mind of Joseph Smith, Psychobiography in the Book of Mormon, written by Robert D. Anderson, or the book titled The Sword of Laban, Joseph Smith Jr. and the Dissociated Mind, by William Moraine. I haven't personally read these books, but they are the points of primary research where all of these connections come from, and I'm just relaying those to you. Alright, that's enough for these early autobiographical connections, but trust me, we only scratched the surface when it comes to these. We're just truncating the study for the sake of time. There are plenty more of them, but we can't get too mired in all of the details. Let's move on to the next point of contention when it comes to the claims and content portion of today's analysis. Let's talk about corrections in the Book of Mormon. As it is reported during the translation process of the Book of Mormon, Joseph would see a phrase, then he would read it out loud to the scribe, then the scribe would read it back to Joseph, and the phrase would remain in front of Joseph's eyes until they both had the phrase down perfectly. Then that phrase would disappear and the next phrase would appear. With this method of translation, there is literally no possible way that there could be a mistake. Whether or not Joseph was translating from plates doesn't matter if he was indeed translating by the power of God as described. There shouldn't be a single mistake in the entire book. Well, there have been well over 4,000 changes from the original 1830 print of the Book of Mormon compared to the current publication, and those changes have just been occurring bit by bit piecemeal year after year. And those are 4,000 non-clerical changes, not just commas or periods. Those are large changes, adding of words, removal of words, changing sentences around. It's just unbelievable. But those aren't the mistakes that I'm talking about for this part. I'm talking about mistakes that made their way into the Book of Mormon and for whatever reason remain there to this day. We'll talk about the problems with the printer's manuscript momentarily, which is where all the commas and punctuation stuff comes into mind. But for now, let's just talk about some specific verses that have physical mistakes in them. This is Mosiah chapter 7, verse 8. Quote, "And it came to pass, when they had been in prison 2 days, they were again brought before their king, and their bands were loosed, and they stood before the king and were permitted, or rather commanded, that they should answer the questions which he should ask them." End quote. That little "or rather" phrase in there is a correction that Joseph made mid-sentence while dictating the Book of Mormon to Oliver Cowdery or Peter Whitmer or any of the other people that served as scribes. Let's get a few more examples rapid fire. Quote, "And thus we see that when these Lamanites were brought to believe and to know the truth, they were firm and would suffer even unto death rather than commit sin. And thus we see that they buried their weapons of peace," or they buried their weapons of war for peace. End quote. What are weapons of peace? Oh yeah, Joseph didn't even know because he stopped and changed it to weapons of war for peace. The mistakes just keep coming. Let's go. Quote, "While on the other hand, there was now and then a man fell among the Nephites by their swords and the loss of blood, they being shielded from the more vital parts of the body," or the more vital parts of the body being shielded from the strokes of the Lamanites by their breastplates and their arm shields and their head plates, and thus the Nephites did carry on the work of death among the Lamanites. End quote. Now, why does a person need to be shielded from the more vital parts of their body? Oh, wait, Joseph just went back and fixed it to say the more vital parts of the body were shielded from the strokes of the Lamanites. It's just one more correction that Joseph had to make. The next one dovetails into our next point of criticism about the Book of Mormon claims and content, but it also represents a mistake that he made. And this is just 2 different verses successively. Quote, "And I did teach my people to build buildings, and to work in all manner of wood, and of iron, and of copper, and of brass, and of steel, and of gold, and of silver, and of precious ores, which were in great abundance." The next verse reads, "And I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things, for they were not to be found upon the land. Wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple, but the manner of construction was like unto the temple of Solomon, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine." So the people learned how to work with all these amazing materials, which were in great abundance, but when it came to build a temple like in Solomon's temple in the very next verse, Nephi just couldn't find enough materials to make it perfect. I mean, this is just a very simple contradiction from one verse to the very next consecutive verse. Not only that, but I said that this dovetails into the next point of criticism of the Book of Mormon content and claims. We've talked about enough of the mistakes that Joseph Smith made that he just fixed on the fly, and trust me, there are way more than we just talked about. But now let's talk about the things that Joseph didn't realize were mistakes. This is where our comprehension of anachronisms really comes into play. We talked about it earlier, but it's a challenging point in dating of something. In the last verse that we read, it said that Nephi taught his people to work in all manners of wood, and that's where he should have stopped. Joseph could have added in stones and gold, but even those are kind of going a bit far, and they weren't used in America until after this supposed account. But Joseph didn't stop at wood, and he made a list. He said that the people worked with wood, iron, copper, brass, steel, gold, silver, and other precious ores. This meant that the people of ancient America smelted metals and used them. The people that were actually in ancient America at the time had no idea this was the case, but the Book of Mormon says that it's the case, and of course it's the most correct book on the planet. This isn't the only situation where these metals are described, and this is a huge rabbit hole to fall down here. So, let's fall into it. Hang in there with me while we try and tackle some of the problems in the claims and content of the Book of Mormon. Anachronisms are going to be our main point of focus for the next little while here. The use of various metals is something that we can harp on for quite some time here. The Book of Mormon mentions swords many times, chariots, scimitars, and blades that were cankered with rust, implying steel or iron swords. Well, none of these existed before the Old World started exploring the Americas and bringing those things over. A person might say that a smaller tribe of Native Americans might have been using them on the American continent, and we, of course, just haven't found evidence for them yet. Well, the problem with that is the strategic advantage that these things give. Historically speaking, the society with the most advanced weapons typically comes out on top and conquers the surrounding societies. For example, chariots, bows, and steel swords were the marks of the society that tended to conquer everybody during the supposed time of the gold plate's authorship. I mean, even the Bible says in Judges 1:19, quote, "And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron," end quote. Well, whoever had the chariots had the tactical advantage, simple as that. And that society tended to win battles more frequently. That meant that the neighboring enemy tribes had to either get their own chariots or they would be squashed by the tribe with the technological advance. This spread of the most advanced idea is something that can be traced with countless things throughout human history. It's very simple. The most successful idea tends to be the one that spreads the best. That's just a meme. That's how it works in human society. Well, chariots are a major tactical advantage, and the society that had those destroyed the societies that didn't. So, we would expect to find a lot of those chariots. And the best thing about metal chariots is they never disappear without explanation. I mean, they may rust, they may fall apart, but in paleontology studies, there should be hundreds of these things popping up all over the American continents. I mean, according to the Book of Mormon anyway. Or, I mean, even in just one small isolated part, but the evidence simply isn't there. No matter how much searching we do, we can't find any chariots, swords, scimitars, metal shields, metal armor, or even high-temperature smelting furnaces to turn iron ore into chariots or swords or any of these other fun toys. Now, let me cover both bases here, because we have found some evidence that smelters were used in ancient Mesoamerica, but they were usually low heat, and they were usually used to refine copper ore or make dyes extracted from ore for use on clothes or staining leather. There is absolutely zero evidence of metal swords being used, or even evidence of the practical capability of the ancient inhabitants to perform advanced metallurgy with these smelters. They didn't even have wheels to put on chariots. That's right, the Native Americans didn't even know about wheels. They occasionally used metal for hatchets or other small tools, but entire metal swords and armor are things that simply did not exist on the American continents during the times described in the Book of Mormon. There are just huge problems with this. Another big anachronism in the Book of Mormon is the use of precious metals for coins. That is something great about coins for money. They never deteriorate like other commodities do. We have thousands of coins from the ancient Roman Empire, which was constructed 300 years before Joseph was supposedly born. I mean, these coins have heads of state printed on them. Whether they're Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, they still exist in their authentic original form, and we can date them to the Roman Empire. Well, apparently the people in the Book of Mormon times used coins as well. There's an entire economy of coins described in detail in the Book of Mormon. This is Alma 11, 3 through 19. It may seem like a large excerpt, but it says a lot that we need to talk about. Quote, "And the judges received for his wages, according to his time, a senine of gold for a day, or a senum of silver, which is equal to a senine of gold. And this is according to the law which was given. Now these are the names of the different pieces of their gold and of their silver, according to their value. And the names are given by the Nephites, for they did reckon after the manner of the Jews who were at Jerusalem." The use of reckon there is like reconciling, a ledger book. "Neither did they measure after the manner of the Jews, but they altered their reckoning and their measure according to the minds and the circumstances of the people in every generation until the reign of judges, they having been established by King Messiah." So basically, Joseph said that these coins are based on a fluctuating market. It continues, "Now the reckoning is thus: a senine of gold, a seon of gold, a shum of gold, and a limnah of gold, a senum of silver, an amnor of silver, an isram of silver, and an onti of silver. A senum of silver is equivalent to a senine of gold, and either for a measure of barley and also for a measure of every kind of grain. Now the amount of seon of gold was twice the value of a senine, and a shum of gold was twice the value of a seon, and a limnah of gold was the value of them all, and an amnor of silver was as great as 2 senums, and an esrom of silver was as great as 4 senums, and an onti was as great as them all. Now this is the value of the lesser numbers of their reckoning." I know these are some crazy names, just hang in there. "A shiblon is half of a senon. Therefore, a shiblon for a half a measure of barley. And a shiblum is half of a shiblon. And Leah is the half of a shiblum. And this is their number according to their reckoning. Now an antion of gold is equal to 3 shiblons." End quote. It continues a little on after that, but that was just too much of a headache anyway. Every name that we just read, all of that crazy verbiage, was a different and distinguishable coin from every other name of the coins that were read. Given the abundance of these coins, and the fact that the passage started out with talking about the judges being paid by these coins, which would make them the proprietary commodity of the Nephite Empire, there should be tons of these things still around. We should be finding these things everywhere with the head of Captain Moroni or Alma the Younger or somebody stamped into the metal, but they simply don't exist. In most cases, Native Americans used cacao beans as a commodity like paper or money coin is used today because you could make chocolate out of it and it was very, very valuable. Metal coins were never used for direct trade in the ancient Native American civilizations as it is implied in the Book of Mormon. Now, these metallurgical anachronisms go on for days, but we kind of covered the brunt of them there. Well, some of them can be explained away, while most of them stand as a very legitimate hard criticism of the Book of Mormon. But metals being used for weapons, armor, or commodities is only one small point of anachronism in the Book of Mormon. Let's talk about plant and animal life in the Book of Mormon. Horses are referred to numerous times. We have them in Alma 18, Alma 20, 3 Nephi 3, many other places. And the problem is, horses are not thought to have existed during Book of Mormon times in North America. I mean, they evolved here, but they became extinct at the end of the Pleistocene period, which was 2.5 million to 12,000 years ago. Horses did not reappear in the Americas until the Spaniards brought them over from Europe in 1519, the 16th century. There are multiple references to horses existing and being used in the Book of Mormon, but they simply did not exist during the Book of Mormon time period. Some apologists may argue that they were using tapirs instead of horses, but when you read the passages in context, that's a pretty ridiculous assertion. I mean, how often do you see people riding tapirs like horses or plowing fields with a tapir-drawn plow? I mean, not very often. Another problem is the reference to elephants. Elephants are mentioned in Ether 9 in the Jaredite era, which is 2500 BC. There is no fossil or other evidence to support this placement. I mean, mastodons and mammoths lived during the Pleistocene period in the New World. However, the fossil record indicates that they became extinct at the end of the last ice age, which was 10,000 years ago. Elephants simply did not exist in the time periods discussed in the Book of Mormon, nor did Kuraloms or Kumoms, whatever those are. Next, we have domesticated cattle, swine, and goats that are talked about in Ether 9. However, there is absolutely no evidence of cattle existing on the American continent until they were brought over by the Spaniards in the 16th century. Cattle simply did not exist in America in the time frame described in the Book of Mormon. While swine and goats did exist in America during the Book of Mormon, none of them were actually domesticated. Most of the swine were wild boar, and most of the goats were free-range or mountain goats. So none of these domesticated animals existed in their current form in the Americas during the time the Book of Mormon as it claims. In fact, all of the animals mentioned in the Book of Mormon are from European descent. Meanwhile, none of the animals that we typically understand to be native to the Americans are even mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Some examples of Native American animals are the buffalo, the tapir, the sloth, llama, puma, jaguars, vultures, anteaters, antelope, raccoon, bear, platypus, beaver, and not a single one of those makes the cut into the Book of Mormon. However, all the animals that it does talk about are strictly from European descent and didn't make their way to the Americas until the 16th century, 3,100 years after the Book of Mormon talks about these animals being here. I mean, it's crazy. Some of the European animals described in the Book of Mormon are lamb, cattle, swine, horses, elephants, asses, most of which we covered, but we know for a fact that none of these showed up until the 16th century, and they could not legitimately be recorded in the Book of Mormon unless they were written by somebody of European descent, pointing out a massive set of anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. Not only the animals, but the plants make problems for the Book of Mormon too. According to what we read earlier, apparently barley and wheat are used as primary crops in the time of the Book of Mormon, but they were also brought over from the Old World after Columbus. Barley and wheat, as described in the Book of Mormon, simply did not exist in the Americas. What's more is the Book of Mormon didn't mention common crops that were cultivated by the Native Americans, like cacao beans, lima beans, squash, avocados, potatoes, and maize. All of those were commonly grown and traded among native tribes, but the Book of Mormon doesn't even allude to them, much less mention any of them. That stands out as a glaring anachronism. One last thing to mention with anachronistic materials: silk. Silk is mentioned 6 times in the Book of Mormon, but it simply did not exist in the Americas until the European settlers started making their way over after Columbus. It wasn't even manufactured in the Old World. Most Europeans that had silk acquired it through trade with Oriental Asian societies. Silk was a very, very rare commodity, especially in the Book of Mormon times. Now, you may ask why it took so much time to go through all of those anachronisms. Well, because that is a lot of evidence that is problematic, whether it exists and it isn't mentioned in the Book of Mormon, or the Book of Mormon mentions it and it doesn't exist. Both ways, the evidence that exists flies in the face of the Book of Mormon. Everything that we talked about for the last few minutes is all stuff that we should have evidence for, and it simply doesn't exist. The Book of Mormon ends talking about a massive battle wherein over 2 million people die by a brutal sword and shield battle. This battle site was the Hill Cumorah in western New York, mere miles away from Joseph Smith's home in Palmyra. The church currently owns this hill and has constructed a massive monument with an angel Moroni that's some 40 feet tall on top of the monument. For over half a century, Farms Research Center has existed for the sole purpose of finding archaeological evidence to support the Book of Mormon, and so far it's come up completely dry. According to the doctrine of the Book of Mormon, there are over 2 million Native American corpses under the dirt of that hill in New York, all of which were clad in ancient metal armor with steel arrows and swords sticking out of the corpses. But we have yet to see a single remain uncovered on that hill. We could fill entire museums with what's buried in the ground in Joseph's backyard, but the church won't let us excavate the hill. Farms could have all of their work and research come to fruition by digging 20 feet below the surface of that hill, but the church won't allow it to happen. We would be able to see that these artifacts exist if we only could take a powerful metal detector or ground-penetrating radar system up there and look around. We wouldn't even have to dig into the actual dirt. We could just run this device non-invasively over the ground, but the church simply won't let that happen. I only ask why. There is no justification for this unbreakable stone wall in place by the church against hard research to try and substantiate the Book of Mormon. We have to ask why. To solidify this point and everything that we've been talking about leading up to this, I'm going to default to an expert. I can relay hours worth of information that can be easily found on the internet, but it just doesn't quite hold as much weight as bringing on an actual person that works in these fields of study. For this, I petitioned Rachel Nannon Brown to come onto the show and discuss some of the finer points of archaeology and paleontology and her experiences with digging in the ground. Hopefully we can all learn a bit from her contribution to the show. All right, I'd like to welcome our guest to the show, Rachel Nannon Brown. She's known in the atheist community as an evolutionary scientist and just a spaz know-it-all. She started her podcasting career as the science correspondent on Dogma Debate, and now continues her evolution sciencing stuff on Atheists on Air. She's also part of the Paleolab team for the Perot Museum, as well as for the Arlington Archosaur site, where she's worked on fossils dating from 98 million years to 100,000 years old. Beyond that, she just reads way too much evolutionary science and history. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this.
Absolutely. I can think of very few other people that would be well-fitting to include into this portion of the show, because we need to talk about stuff that's in the dirt, and that's what you specialize in, right?
Yes, I mean, I hope I don't disappoint, because I dig, dinosaurs and mammoths, but I mean, we're all linked together anyway. Humans are animals too, so I do know some history when it comes to humans as well, so.
Very cool. Well, why don't we just take that as a jumping off point, because we're talking about the anachronistic problems that are in the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon mentions elephants. What do you have to say about the presence of elephants in the on any of the American continents at any point in time?
Okay. Well, when I was reading about what the Mormon apologists are saying about elephants and horses, and a lot of the times they get really slippery on what an elephant is, because everyone thinks that they know what an elephant is, but there's several types. There's the evolution of elephants, there's the mammoth, and they even said that one of the Mormon apologists, I guess they thought it was a tapir, because they're wiggling around, because we have no fossil evidence of elephants being in America at this time. They were before, woolly mammoth, the Columbian mammoth that I actually work on at Perot, were definitely in North America because they came from Africa. So they developed in Africa, and they actually spread through Asia, and then they went over the Bering Strait, and then they entered America for a long time.
So when I should ask, when did those end up dying out? Because that's the operative thing here. The earliest sources in the Book of Mormon date back to 2500 BCE. When did those? What time frame do most of those fossils that we're extracting kind of hail from?
Well, when it comes to the elephant, it's about 10,000 years is the last one. And I actually found the horse evolution and migration part of this story to be really, really interesting. Though the elephants are awesome, everyone loves elephants. They pretty much went extinct because of there was a shift in climate that started about 2.5 million years ago, global, and it was getting colder and colder and drier. And so North America was going through changes from 2.5 million to about 12,000 years. And so that opened the Bering Strait because all the water is getting caught in the ice caps. And so all these animals are starting to escape into North America, and they stay there for a while until the weather starts to change again. And they get trapped, and they usually end up starving. And some people think that humans, which did start trickling in at this point about 15,000, 20,000 years ago up in the Bering Strait. And there's evidence of them killing ponies and some elephants up there. But after that point, they're not in actually what people think of as the United States. They're extinct at this point because of the climate. And I think, at least with the horse, the last one that, I guess the oldest specimen that we have, or the youngest specimen that we have, is in Alaska at 7,600 years old, which is a very small pony.
For clarification's sake, that is older than 2,500 years old, or 2,500 BC, right?
Yes. Okay. So that's the interesting part.
Yeah, just
that is the interesting part. That horses are definitely in North America because they evolved there. They actually evolved there for 30 million years. They diversified into like 15 different branches, small and big and long teeth and short teeth, and leaf eaters and grass eaters. And as soon as things started to get really cold, all the grasslands dried up. So they started to go north, and only the form that we know of as the horse was really starting to survive because it had really long teeth that could eat the grasses, which I don't know if you want me to go into the crazy science of the grasses that killed off the horses, but
let's go ahead and touch on that. What did kill the horses off? Because we need to know about that, because it took until the conquistadors came over to South America for horses to be reintroduced, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So what killed off the horses that existed here before then?
Even though they say that there was elephants and there's donkeys and other animals that also either never were there, like cattle, because cattle was not, they didn't evolve there. They didn't go extinct and whenever the climate was changing, they literally weren't there. They were in Europe and Africa and Asia. But the other ones actually did trickle in either from the Bering Strait like the elephant did, or they evolved in North America, which is the horse. And the story of the horse, summarized, is about 35 to 50 million years ago, all of like the zebra and the horse and the donkey and every kind of horse form was evolved from one group that was really small. It ate leaves. It wasn't like a grass eater. And over the next 30 million years, as the climate was getting colder, because at about 2.5 million, they hit a cold spell, and it kind of kickstarted the evolution of the horse. So I think the horses are a very good example, instead of having to go into the evolution of the elephants and every other animal that they say that's there that wasn't. The horses are a really good example because though cattle were not in North America at all at this point. They did not evolve in North America like the horses did. They didn't enter, through the land bridges as the climate was getting colder like the elephants did. They literally weren't there. They were in Europe and Africa. And I pretty much just pushed them aside because there's literally no fossil evidence of them being around at the times that they're saying. So with horses...
I think that's kind of the operative of what we're talking about here, because where you specialize is in the fossil evidence. I mean, you don't read supposed ancient texts or things that are recorded as ancient texts and say, okay, this is fact. You're actually digging into the ground and unearthing bones that tell us a lot more than any book or religious text could. And I think that's important. I'm glad that we're talking about horses, because I have here 3 or 4 different references that horses are referred to in the Book of Mormon in the Native American, or in the North American continent, in times that they just simply could not have existed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a glaring problem.
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, science is always as honest as it can be. And so I always feel like if there's something worth discussing and passing on knowledge-wise, then it better not be connected to, it's just an old man several thousand years ago that said that he saw it happen. I don't care. I don't care if it was 50 years ago or 10 years ago.
Or beyond that, somebody that lived 180 years ago wrote in a book that somebody that a few thousand years ago said that this existed, because that's even less substantiated, right? That's even more problematic.
I don't even trust my own boyfriend, what he says he sees or thinks or happened. I'm like, yeah, really? Well, I didn't see it. Where's the evidence?
Right, exactly. Where's the evidence? That's the thing that we need, that we're harping on here, is where is the evidence? Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about horses and elephants here. There's kind of this abundance of things that existed in the old world that are present in the Book of Mormon. You touched on some of them, cattle, lambs. Yeah,
cattle, not there.
Horses. Yeah, none of those were there. But
horses were there.
But not during the time described in the Book of Mormon, right?
So that's why I think that this one's the most important, is that people will probably read and be like, oh, look, horses, they were in North America up to 7,600 years ago. Oh my gosh, that's like really similar to what the Mormon says. Okay, no. If you actually look at the evolution of the horse and what's happening to the surrounding branches at about 2 million years to 11,000 years, which is a good 6,000, 7,000 before the Mormon, saying that horses are around. So what happens at 11,000, they are extinct in North America. And all the other animals are too. These large animals, they have nothing to eat. It's too cold. The grasslands have become tundras and forests and ice caps. And they are pretty much trapped in Alaska. And they pretty much get murdered in Alaska by the people coming over the land bridge. Tiny little horses, that's the last one. There's nothing else in North America that can survive that's large like that.
And that's kind of the thing here too, is if somebody did find evidence of a horse existing in, let's say, anywhere on the North or South or Mesoamerican continent, that was from the time frame that the Book of Mormon describes, anywhere from 2500 BCE to 300 CE, that would blow science's mind, right? That would be a huge, huge finding in all of archaeological evidence, right?
Well, I mean, there are definitely examples of things that would more like make our head explode, like finding a hominid human evolution fossil in Texas. That would be a big freaking problem. If you find a dwindling horse that's hanging out in Texas at around the time that the Mormons said, I mean, we have the fossil record that they were not there at 11,000 years. We had the reasons why. It's not just, they disappeared. What happened? Oh my gosh. It was a pattern. And so we have that gap. So if there are a couple horses that were dwindling around, surviving on a small island somewhere, it still would not prove the Book of Mormon. But we don't have any horses in North America at that point. We don't.
And that's something else to touch on, is when a certain tribe of people do have a domesticated animal, like cattle or lamb or horses or whatever, there's evidence surrounding that. We see them in large groups that all died off in the same area, or we see evidence of like corrals or places where they held all of these domesticated animals. Same like with buffalo in the American continent. We see where they were domesticated for, breeding stock. But we don't have any evidence of that ever happening here on the American continent, do we?
Yeah. With cattle, I mean, it's very obvious whenever humans get a hold of a group of animals and they manicure them because their genetics change, their bodies change, their mannerisms change, their food changes. They become like this weird shadow of their former self animal. I mean, the bovine that the cattle came from is extinct.
Right. They don't need to have that extra edge that helps them survive out in the wild anymore. They don't need to have the bigger horns. They don't need to have the leaner stature. They don't need to have the things that are more beneficial to them with dealing with predators and prey. They're just walking around in a field eating all the time.
Right. And so we can look at not only fossils, but we can look at genetics and we can look at the literal animal. And if someone claims, hey, those were domesticated at this point, and we go, oh, there's no, those are literally wild animals. No, those were domesticated. No, that shows no signs whatsoever of it being domesticated. That would be an issue for their side. But we don't even have any fossils at all of the animals that they claim to have domesticated.
Right, and that's the thing is there are a lot of animals that were in America at the time that the Book of Mormon was, the source text for the Book of Mormon were supposedly written. I mean, there are examples of, buffalo or tapir that we talked about that some apologists like to allude to, or there's sloths, there's llama, puma, jaguar, vultures, there's anteaters, antelope, raccoon, bear, platypus, beaver. There's all kinds of other animals, but they're strangely absent from the Book of Mormon.
That's interesting. I don't know anything about the Book of Mormon, so all of this stuff is very shocking to me because I just learned about the extinction events of the megafauna and the climate change and the human, killing of all the animals, and there's not enough grass for the horses and they all die. And then it's like Mormons just come out of nowhere and they're like, no, we had chariots. What?
Okay, so let's see if we can blow your mind a little bit more. Apparently, in the Book of Mormon, there is an entire economy based off of metal coins, specifically silver and gold coins. Let me read you some of these denominations and see what you think of them. We have a senum of silver, an amnor of silver, an Ezrom of silver, and an anti of silver. There's a Sion of gold, and it's twice the value of a C9. There's a Shum of gold, it's twice the value of a Sion. A Limnah of gold was twice the value of them all. What? So have you, in all of your workings?
How do we know of these words? Like, are there other evidences? Have we found any? Have we found any other writings, maybe of the culture, that use those words? Or is it just in that book that says that it happened and that's what it was called?
Well, that's the thing is the Book of Mormon kind of represents the only history of any of the Americans that we've ever had. I mean, as far as I'm aware, the Mayan culture was the only Native American culture that ever had any sophisticated writing that we have evidence of. And they weren't related to anybody described in the Book of Mormon. This is the only evidence that we have that's written by any historian or abridger of anybody that was living in Native America.
Well, it sounds like they got it all wrong anyway. Right? I mean, the actual Native Americans and the Clovis people, it doesn't sound like they were telling their story. They're just making up things and saying they have silver and iron coins and they have... Where are they getting this information?
That's the thing. That's what we're trying to talk about. That's what I'm curious about is where did this information come from? So, I mean, let me ask, in all of your various diggings, I know you don't necessarily study specifically anthropological evidence of things like this that are going on, and I know your digs tend to date back before humans were here in America. But have you ever found a gold coin with Alma the Younger's face printed on it, like we've found coins in the Roman Empire with Caesar's face printed on them?
No. Yeah, though I don't do much archaeology stuff. I have never seen or read, and the stuff I just researched, I don't see anything about that. I mean, I scoured through journals about the Native Americans throughout all of North America and what metals they were using at the exact time that the Mormons, actually a little bit before, because you want to see kind of where it starts, what metals did they start using. And it's copper, and they do it for jewelry, for the heads of their tribes, its adornments. I mean, they aren't really even using weapons. They aren't making coins. Like, it's copper. So I haven't found any piece of the story that they're giving me. I haven't found any evidence for any of it. So it's like they just keep building. And I'm like, wait, no, you said iron? Where? Like, no, but don't worry about that. It's called this, though. It's a coin. No, wait, iron?
Well, and that's the thing, too, is if they were using these, we would not only find something that's iron. I mean, because iron doesn't just deteriorate or biodegrade like, bodies or, I mean, any biological material does. Iron tends to stick around. It might rust, but that's about it. It still stays in its original form. But they also would have all kinds of other things that are necessary in order for using iron, or I mean, because we found some low temperature smelters that are used to form copper or to extract copper ore, but iron requires a lot higher heat, and we would find those smelters. We would find traders. We would find other things that are built around the use of iron that just seem like they're absent. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. They were doing very, very minimalistic smelting for copper, and I don't really feel like they found it necessary to continue to find more ways of smelting more things, because what they were using metals for was so different. It wasn't for combat. It wasn't for currency. It was for making jewelry, and we have no evidence of these higher techniques for smelting that would be required for iron at all in North America. And so without the evidence of the smelting techniques, and there's no evidence for the actual materials they're using in these forms that they're saying exist, I'm having a hard time believing it.
Let me just touch on something that's kind of tantamount to everything that you're saying, and it's something that's operative in the scientific sphere that might not be operative in everyday conversation. You say there's no evidence for. Some people might say, well, we might find evidence later, but that's not really the argument. We have done a lot of digging. We have done a lot of evidence. We've looked for all this. We've done this research, and the fact that the evidence for it is completely absent tends to take away the credibility that we ever will find anything like that. So, I mean, Can you speak on that? Like what science considers we haven't found evidence for, as opposed to it doesn't exist? Because those are two different things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the arguments, when people say, oh, anything's possible, maybe we just haven't found it yet. Well, what if God is a pickle on the outside of the universe that loves to eat spaghetti? I'm like, okay, well, I mean, it's cool that it could be in some sort of imaginary reality, but unless you give me, the rudest way I usually say it is, unless you give me pieces of information that make it worthwhile to contemplate the idea you're giving me, I'm not going to contemplate it, because we have so much more information that we do have that we need to contemplate and understand and put together. Why would I want to sit here and go, oh, well, that is possible. Maybe it's using the metals of the things that we haven't found yet, because it could be there. We just haven't found it. I'm like, okay, we have no evidence. So I'm not going to contemplate it.
So in that case, it's saying that we have no evidence for it is almost similar to saying that, well, it doesn't really exist the way that you're claiming, because somebody that does claim, well, this existed, this is, this actually happened, but we just haven't found the evidence for it yet, is basically making the argument from ignorance, right? They're saying that we know that this happened just because it was written in this book. However, it doesn't necessarily align with science, but one day science will advance to a point that it will align with what's written in this book. And that's just completely wrong. That's completely ignorant of the actual science, right?
Yeah. I mean, people taking the word of a person they never met, even yesterday, taking their word for it seems ridiculous to me if you're comparing it to looking at a fossil in your hand. And then you start to go back a couple thousand years and you just get, that's Joseph. Joseph, this is what happened to him. And this is a book that was written and these are the stories and this is the way it is. This is because he said so. And you're like, okay, that's okay. Interesting story. Ooh, is that a fossil? What is that? Oh, that kind of contradicts. I'm going to believe the man and what he said that I don't know over the thing I'm literally holding. And I feel like that's the most honest way to kind of see it, is that you need to respect the evidences that you find and that we've already found, because we've not only discovered it, but we've put it together with every other part of a living theory. And another really big idea is, even though, you can say anything's possible, and then you go, well, there is no evidence for it, so I'm not going to contemplate it. But what's more powerful...
Well, and that's the thing, is it's not necessarily possible until it's demonstrated that it's possible, right? I mean, if you're positing a theory of the existence of something or any sort of scientific theory, the phrase is, Aaron Ross says this all the time, if you can't show it, you don't know it, right? If you're making an argument for some sort of theory, a scientific theory or otherwise, you have to have something to back you up, right?
Right. You have to have the evidence.
Yeah, exactly. That's what science is so good for, is scientists constantly disproving each other with the new information or new evidence that they find. And I find that remarkable.
And the amount of information... Like, all we know now, what's so amazing is that we not only can go, oh, you don't have any evidence, then, then you have no evidence. And that story is probably not true because you have no evidence. We go, okay,
exactly.
What's happening around this scenario? So if you say, oh, you could find a hominid fossil in Texas, anything's possible. We go, okay, there's no hominid fossils in Texas, so there's no evidence for it. Also, we know the human evolution story. We know we came from Africa. We know hominids developed in this area at this time, in these populations. This is what they look like. This is generally what they're doing. This is where they're not supposed to be at all. It's literally impossible. They can't be in Texas because they're literally in Ethiopia only. And this is what they look like at this time. So it is impossible for a hominid to be in Texas with the information that we have. And if he has wings or something.
And you're using hominid here as kind of a point to catch the larger idea here. You can apply this idea of, we haven't found a hominid here, therefore we can assert that it probably doesn't exist until some other contrary evidence comes into play. The same thing is, like we were talking about earlier, horses or metals or anything other than copper, like iron or gold or silver like this, or coins. I mean, the evidence just simply isn't there to substantiate the claim.
Yeah, and if it was true, it would make no sense to the story we've already built, which is a big issue. It's like, you have an iron sword, but we have no smelting evidence. We have no iron in the area. What do you mean? That doesn't
Where
make
did the
sense.
sword come from? Did it just fall out of the sky?
No parts leading up to it. It's like finding a rabbit in the Cambrian. You have no parts leading up to it. And anything's not possible. There will not be a rabbit in the Cambrian period at 500 million years old, because rabbits evolved after everything else, after the reptiles and the fish and the mammals. It can't happen. So we know it won't happen. It doesn't matter if you think you have evidence. It can't happen, literally.
Now, and that was something I was going to say earlier, is I find it remarkable that oftentimes a believing Mormon will say, well, that's on the internet. You can't believe everything that you read on the internet. Okay, I can agree with that. There is a lot of useless stuff on the internet that is not believable, that can't be substantiated.
99% of it.
Right, but if you're holding a fossil, a bone, or, a fossilized bone in your hand that is X amount of million years old, and it plays into this bigger idea of the theory of evolution, and it fits perfectly in line with everything that evolution has told us up to this point and will tell us after this point, you're kind of on a different playing field of something that somebody said in their blog on the internet versus what we dug up out of the ground. Right?
Yeah, it's just basal. It's the starting point that I think everyone just needs to be at, because it's honest and it's self-driven. It's not assuming, oh, that person's, what he's telling me, he did the research, he's telling the truth, he doesn't have alternative motives. It's actually finding the raw evidence. And sure, it's a pain in the ass to be like, oh, what the hell does that mean? I mean, what is a taper? What is an equus? There's huge words, because the scientific community is pretty bad at making it super fun to navigate through evolutionary history, but it is out there. I mean, I self-taught myself. You just have to follow the paths of your interests, and you'll find, I mean, it's all connected. And for someone to assume the book's right and have all the other missing pieces, I'm like, well, but I have this piece and this one and that one and this and that fossil and that and these genetics. And we can go out to the dig site if you want. I can get an ancestor of the hadrosaur and show you how it looks like this one, but it's more primitive than this one over here. It's actually intermediate. It's right there. You literally dug it up with me.
And it exists in the ground. They are literally able to see where it is available, where you're taking your little tiny toothbrushes and you're brushing away the dirt away from the actual fossil. I remember hearing a story. I can't remember if you said this on Atheist on Air or if it was on Dogma Debate. You went to some place, some public place, and you had to wait, but you had a box full of a bunch of, they just looked like rocks and fossil pieces and stuff.
Yeah.
And you sat down next to this lady. Yeah, tell us this story real quick.
Yeah, this was, I mean, I'm constantly trying to exercise my patience with people, because everyone's a victim. Everyone is a victim of their culture and their parents and their education. And it sometimes takes that spark to make you go, oh, I want to go learn more science. So I don't blame people for not knowing stuff, because I didn't know it for a long time too. And so I'm always as patient and nice as I can be. And I sat in AutoZone getting my car inspected, and I had a box of, what we found was regurgitated crocodiliform food. So an ancient crocodile that we dug at the site. I had the stomach contents of it, which was part of like a limb bone of a herbivore dinosaur, like a hadrosaur, and all these like ribs, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff in here. And so we were trying to figure out what on earth this thing is.
So it was a pile of ancient dirt with ancient bones and crap in it.
It was a lot of stuff.
And you knew that it was. So let me ask. You knew that it was regurgitated because it was all of these things mixed together in one place, right?
Right, and also its location where it was found. We could also find coprolites in the area. We know that it's a crocodiliform site. It's a swamp. And if you look at the contents, I called it the tumor fossil because I had no idea what it was. I just knew there was a giant part at the end of a limb bone sticking out of it. And I just wanted to know where it went. And so I was given the giant box of the tumor fossil, and I was told to take it home and take it to the lab next day because our trucks were so full of fossils that we found that day. We ran out of room. And so I was like, I'll just pick at that limb bone and see how far it goes in there, because I don't understand this form whatsoever. So I brought it in, started picking at it, and a woman sat next to me, and I'm like, I know how weird this looks. I was like, please don't talk to me. She's like, oh, what are you doing? I was like, I'm a research assistant at a dinosaur site, so I'm just cleaning up some of the fossils we found. She's like, those are fossils? Yeah, actually, this is part of the limbo, and you see how, like, and I'm trying to like, yeah, look, this is how it is, and so just believe me. And she's like, that looks like a rock. Like, well, okay, well, there's actually rocks in here. So this is the inside of a rock. You see how the pattern is like this. This is a bone. You see how there's the bubbles. She's like, it looks like a rock to me. Those look the same. I was like, well, do you see this bulb? And I'm trying to show her the difference. And she's like, well, how do you know that's a fossil? That thing looks like a fossil. I'm like, what do you mean? How do we know that the bubbles inside mean it's a fossil? She's like, yeah. She's like, I don't know. Couple hundred years of research and finding millions of fossils and having people that are educated working on this stuff and coming up. I didn't say any of that. I just sat there and was like, well, that's what I researched, and I was just trying to be as nice as possible and tell her that, insert cuss word, you are not a paleontologist. I don't care if you think it's a rock, because it's not. I have the education you don't. Sit back down.
Yes, and that's the thing too. That's the operative idea of it, is you are operating like you with the box of stuff in your hand. You have the brush. You're trying to dig this out, this tumor limb bone or whatever this was. You're trying to figure out what it was. You're operating based off of hundreds of years of research and people doing exactly what you're doing, digging in the dirt, finding bones, finding rocks, separating them out, and saying, what does all of this evidence tell us?
Yeah.
And this lady was probably sitting back from a perspective of saying, well, she probably didn't have this thought in her mind specifically, but this, the Bible doesn't say anything about any of the stuff that's in your hands, so, I don't care to believe it. Or, maybe she just wasn't even interested in entertaining the conversation because she thought that it might come in conflict with what she knows. Right?
Yeah, I would think that, as soon as she realized I said fossil, that she'd back off and be like, oh, I don't want to enter that. But she's like, no, that looks like a rock to me. I'm like, ugh. And I'm running through the information in my head about where we found this and how its location is next to, the hip joints and blah, blah, blah. And I'm visualizing these animals. So it makes sense where this regurgitation is. So, of course, it's a freaking fossil. We've found the rest of the body.
Right.
What do you think? It's a rock crocodile? But she doesn't know any of that, so I just kind of smiled.
And that's the thing that I think is more intellectually honest with taking an open mind about this. Because if I would have been sitting next to you in that AutoZone, I would have been looking in the box and saying, what is all of that? That is really weird. I've never seen that before. And then you would start to explain this to me and tell me about the science and tell me that we know for a fact that this was...
I was ready to Google pictures for her.
Exactly.
I was like... This is here. This is the journal. And you see, this is a diagram, but she just kept saying it was a rock. And I just got pissed eventually.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I would have been so intrigued by what you had in your hands. I would have been like, what you're holding in your hand is 20 million years old. My mind is exploded right now.
Yeah, her face when I said 97 million was amazing.
Oh, 97 million years old? You're holding something in your hand that was that old? That's just unbelievable.
The whole site is 97 to 100 million. Everything you touch. It's pretty crazy.
That's so crazy to think about. Like, I'm wearing clothes that were made less than a year ago. You were holding something that was made 97 million of those ago.
And we can still see, its stomach contents. I know it ate part of a hadrosaur that probably drifted down the creek system in a very, very watery Texas at the time. And they think the world's 6,000 years old. And Mormons think, oh, wow, there's chariots and horses, at 2,500, BC. I'm like, that is not a long time ago. This is such, small stuff. I met 97 million.
Yeah, that's a huge blind spot that humans tend to have, is we have recorded history from ancient Sumeria, maybe 6,000, 7,000 years ago, and that is the furthest back any written evidence ever goes of any written language that's taught or passed down through generations. Before that, the Earth existed 3.5 or 4.5 billion years before that. We can't just ignore that. We're kind of a blip on the radar.
Yeah. People think oh, there's no writing? Guess there's no people. Guess there's no planet. I'm like, Homo sapiens have been around for 200,000 years. Here's a fossil. It's called Omo. O-M-O. Go look them up. And they're like, oh, well then humans were created. No. Here's Homo heidelbergensis. This is the one right before it. Okay, before that, here's Homo erectus and Ergaster. And I'll link them all the way back. And then nope, those are monkeys.
Maybe you can comment on this. So for my job, I do sales, and I travel to very rural parts of Colorado and Nebraska and Wyoming. And, there are people that have a very certain mindset out there. And somebody brought up, I got into a discussion with this really nice lady, and she brought up this news headline a few months back of a new find of, I think it was, Homo naftali, maybe? Homo something, that there was like over 2,000 specimen of these bones that were found in this common colony that factors into the entire field of anthropology and, anthropological archaeology. Do you recall that story that was in the headlines fairly recently?
Oh yeah. Homo. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's Naledi, because you never know what the weird pronunciations of these things. I say Homo naledi, but it could be naldi.
Okay.
You never know how they're going to say it.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. But this nice lady was, she was just like, yeah, I think it's just so funny, all those evolutionists don't know what to say or how to answer that because this just throws the whole theory off. I'm like,
Whoa.
No. This falls perfectly in line with the theory of evolution. You don't know what you're talking about. And she just shut up after that for some reason.
I will blame the way that people write articles, because they love, as soon as something new comes out or kind of new, they're like, oh, let's make a title that makes everyone click it because they panic.
Right.
And it's usually new fossil rewrites evolutionary history. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, it's that other thing that they found that makes evolution look stupid, and new hominid fossil that flips at, the human evolution tree on its head. And then they're like, evolution's stupid. And then it's actually just a fossil group, just like this one, which 1,500 to 2,000 specimens have been found that are absolutely transitional species between the more ape-like or previous, going back to about 7 million years. It's named Sahelanthropus chidensis, and there's several, in the next couple million years, there's Orientugensis, Ardipithecus ramidus. A whole bunch of big words. Everyone knows Lucy.
I know Lucy. Yes.
Australopithecus afarensis. There you go, about 3 million years. And there's like 10 gradually evolving species and branches before Naldi. And then there's more after. And then they just fit perfectly in the middle of this mosaic of features of having, the primitive grasping long fingers, but they're actually very precise, just like human fingers. And then you're going to find something that's mostly bipedal, mostly comfortable being bipedal, but having the ability to climb trees. And then they'll have very small, maybe slightly larger than chimp brains. They definitely aren't human, but they're standing upright with precise, little picking fingers, and they're 5 feet tall. But they have a smaller brain, and they sit there and go, that's an ape. That's an ape.
Well, okay, it might have been part of the ape family or descendant from apes, but it's not an ape as the way you would say it, because, there's 5 main groups that are ape, right? We're part of, Homo sapien is one of the 5 great apes. Is that correct?
Right. So that's another part of the whole story that they don't understand what they're actually saying, because we are part of the great apes. And we are primates, and we are homininae, hominidae, hominids, and hominins. We're all this like branching groups. And whenever they say, oh, it's just an ape, I know that I'm pretty much picturing the Creation Museum when you walk in, you see the Lucy display, and it literally looks like a gorilla. And they're like, this is what Lucy looks like, stupid evolutionist. It just looks like a gorilla, doesn't it? And it's like on all fours.
But
you're like, no.
Lucy was bipedal, wasn't she?
Lucy was bipedal. She had adaptations to climb still, because that's the only thing that makes sense. You can't have a tree-dwelling species go from tree-dwelling to, bam, bipedal, perfect bipedal, having perfect feet and perfect legs. It has to be a transition. You have to have both abilities, and they will gradually fall off as one develops. And that's what we find at about 2 to 3 million years. we have this beautiful group of multiple species that have these different features of longer arms and longer fingers, but bipedal with bigger brains. And they just say it's an ape, aka a gorilla. And it's infuriating because we have so many fossils. And I ask them every time about Homo demonisi. If you find these, find the specimens that make them uncomfortable because their brains are so big, but not big enough to be like people, but they're bipedal and they're using tools.
So, hang on,
and they're living in groups.
That's one of the sticking points that we see throughout these transitional species is an increase in the cubic centimeter capacity of their brain.
Yes.
Right? We see bigger and bigger skulls that housed bigger and bigger brains, which means that they were probably more intelligent. Is that correct?
Right. So if you start at 7 million, that's always your starting point for human evolution. Because
7 million?
Earliest 7 million.
Really?
It's not a human, but it was found in Sahel, Chad. So it's Sahelanthropus, and that's the earliest evidence of moving towards the bipedal stature. Because it has the hole at the bottom of the head where the spine goes in. It's actually being placed farther and farther back. Or farther and farther forward towards the center of the skull, meaning the head is sitting on top of the spine.
Okay, so they were hunched over less and they were upright more, so their spine moved closer to towards the very bottom of their skull. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because you think of a dog, then the hole's at the back of the head because the face is actually facing forward to the spine.
Right.
But humans, it's on top of the spine. So that's what we always look for. You see a skull, where's the foramen magnum? Where's the hole at the bottom of the head? Is it center or is it back? And this one has a kind of centered, but kind of back. And right after that point, we have things called Orientuganensis, Ardipithecus ramidus, and enter 5 species for the next 2 million years that are obviously bipedal.
You are just blowing my mind right now. I'm sorry. This is just such a fascinating
I know
thing.
they're all big words. They're all big words. This is the hardest part, are these first 5, because the rest of them are at least follow a pattern. But the first 5 of Sahelanthropus, Orientuganensis, Ardipithecus ramidus, there's Ardipithecus cadaba, and a couple more that are showing signs of being bipedal. They can walk upright. They have small brains, chimp-sized. They're short.
These are all recovered from Africa. Is that correct? All of these fossils you're talking about?
Every single
Okay, so this is how we know that humans did, in fact, evolve from filthy monkey men in Africa and then slowly spread out from there, adapting and changing as they moved out from the African Sahara, right?
Yep, we stayed in East Africa for a very long time because the Rift Valley is, pretty much cut in Africa. You have changing to the east this weather, and to the west they have forests. Chimps stay in the forests. And what happens to the semi-upright ape men at 7 million years? Well, they start standing upright. Their brains start to expand. So for 7 million years, I guess 6 million-ish, 5.5, we're in Africa, and we don't move. We kind of shift around Ethiopia, maybe going one other country above or below, but it's not until about 2 million that we leave Africa. And we are fully upright. We use tools. We have the brain size tripled.
We have tools. That's something I like to focus on is tools. We have tools because that's something that is found in Native America is we have, they have metal hatchets and some metal tools, some copper tools, but they were not used for combat in the way that it's claimed in the Book of Mormon. We're a tool using species. That's the only way that I'm staring at a computer screen talking to you, across a few thousand miles through copper and fiber optic lines is because we use tools.
Magic. Right. Yeah, definitely. It's a really big part in human evolution is that we not only have the skulls to show we are gradually getting bigger and bigger brains, we're getting taller and taller, more upright. Our lungs are getting bigger. Our arms are getting shorter. Our legs are getting longer. Our fingers are getting more precise. But then, of course, the tools show up because that's why we're getting bigger brains. We're getting smarter. We're needing to use tools. We're needing to be a little bit smarter with finding our food, being social. And the first tools are called Oldowan tools, and it's about 2.6 million years ago.
Holy crap.
And it's the very first tools that are used by the hominids in Africa.
And they were just, whittled down bones, basically?
They're very specific rocks that are chipped in very specific ways. I had to do it in school. It's hard. It's hard to flake it perfectly, to make it fracture, to make a really sharp edge without it like fracturing.
Okay.
And they find these in large amounts, and they don't really change too much, but they're used to cut bone, cut meat.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't use it for warfare or anything. I don't think we had enough population-wise at 2 million years to be killing each other. It was pretty much for scavenging meat and getting roots. And I mean, that the fact that it corresponds so perfectly. We didn't find Oldowan tools with the chimps. We found them, just by chance at the time in which our brain's getting bigger. And our fingers are getting more precise.
That's something that I want to talk about for just a second. Is people always ask for like a transitional fossil of some sort, right? They want to say, oh, well, if we evolved from monkeys, then there should be some, why are there still monkeys? Or, why we should see a transitional fossil. It's like, no, we're in a constant state of transition and flux. We're constantly changing. There isn't a point A and a point B to look at. We're constantly somewhere along the spectrum of transition, right?
Right. It's you pretty much, the person who's asking for the transitional fossil, I've always said, well, you're the one who's choosing point A and point B. So you go, okay, point A, worm, point B, potato chip, go. And I'm like, okay, well, those are random points.
Right.
I'll try to find out, okay. And then I realized most of the time they don't want to sit through the explanation of how a potato chip could be related to an earthworm, because that's a lot of evolutionary history. It's a lot. But they go, okay, I want a transitional species for humans. Where's the ape man? Where's the missing link? And even though the word missing link is not really an actual term, they aren't Googling it. If you Google transitional fossil hominid, or if you Google Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, Homo habilis, all of these species are literally right in the center, and they actually have varying brain size that bridge the bottom and the top of these categories that creationists will say, oh, that's absolutely human. If you have 1,000 cubic centimeter brain, human, absolutely. And then they're like, oh, 400? No, that's an ape. Like, okay, well, about 500.
What about 600?
That's an ape. Right. And then you get to 600, and you get to 700 and 800. Right. They think those don't exist.
And all of those,
they do.
The spine is moving farther and further down on the skull. Fingers are getting longer and more precise. Arms, like you said, arms are getting shorter. Lungs are getting bigger. There's all kinds of things that are coming into play with this. It's not just brain size.
Right. So if you want a transitional species, I always like using, they're called Homo erectus, but it's Homo diminuti, which is found in Diminuti, Georgia. And they have actually so many individuals in this find at 1.8 million years.
Wow.
And there's multiple ones. So they have within that one group that they found a varying spectrum of brain size from like 500 up to like 800. Which bridges the creationist comfort level of human and ape. And I'm like, well, then how is that not transitional? And they're like, well, no, it's a deformed monkey. Like, but there was an old individual found there that didn't have teeth, and he had an injury. And it looks like he survived for a really long time. Wonder who was taking care of him. Oh, was it a tool?
Who was taking care of him? That's a fascinating thing that I didn't think about, is people taking care of people, or early, long time earlier hominids that took care of their old or took care of their deformed. That's a sense of, or a sign of intelligence.
So the bigger brain, the better fingers, the tool usage, what should come after? Well, of course, art, representing the understanding of afterlife, caring about caring about ancestors and caring about your grandparents, not just letting your grandfather who has no teeth just keel over like most animals would.
Right. And that's something,
they just let him die and walk away.
That's something that's fascinating too, is art, because we have art that dates back really far. One of the earliest artworks that we have is I saw it on a documentary. I think it's called Cave of Lost Dreams. It's this cave in France. It's the writings and scrawlings on it date back to, I think, 32,000 years ago or something to that effect.
It's 30 between 32 and 37.
Okay.
I don't know too much about it because I found that as soon as it becomes like it's people stuff, I lose interest. So it's like, ooh, that's a building. I don't care about that. I want to go before it. Right. So the only art I know about is the stuff that comes before it, the precursors to very, very large expressions of art. So you have a painting. Well, what comes before that? Well, you have to have somebody who appreciates colored stones.
Right.
Or to be able to cut. So you have to find these little pieces, and we find them. I mean, it's back to 100,000 years ago. We have African rock art made from red pigment. We start finding burials with burial necklaces. Instead of just dumping the body, they're actually laid down.
Oh.
We find snail shell jewelry at 75,000 years. That's art.
That was something that I wanted to touch on a little bit too. I talked about earlier in the episode about people burying their dead, because there's a lot of evolutionary benefits that stem from people burying their dead. I mean, let's face it, you're not going to catch a disease from a corpse that's buried, under 6 feet of dirt. So when do we start to see that come into early hominid evolution?
Well, I've always thought of everything as a scale. So if you find a burial site with, obviously it has intention, then there's always that precursor, and eventually it gets really hard to find where the understanding of art, like where that evidence is when a hominid appreciates art or appreciates the fact that their grandfather's dead. So the earliest stuff that we can at least tell that something's going on, doesn't mean that it wasn't happening before it, was about 100,000 years. And we have Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis, our cousin, living at the same time. They're both doing it. They're both starting to bury their dead deliberately. And there's one Shanidar cave in Iraq that's about 80,000.
Wow, okay.
There's one at 60,000 at it's called Kibara Cave in Israel. I think the earliest one that I know of it's like QAFZEH site in Israel.
Kafzi.
It's about 100,000 years.
Something. Okay.
Kafzi.
Right.
It's one of the earliest alleged burials of Homo sapiens, and we actually have tombs of like hundreds of individuals of borderline Neanderthal kind of ancestor group. They're just putting their bodies in the same freaking place. That's there's something going on in their brains. They're ticking.
Right. They're finding some sort of benefit to this, or more of them that are doing this are surviving, as opposed to others that are doing it that aren't surviving longer.
Yep. Some sort of it at least lets you know there's something emotional happening,
right,
that they're caring about who they've lost. And then you start finding skulls that are being carried around after they die with markings on them.
Right.
Like your father died, you carried around with you. And you make markings on it.
That's really, really fascinating that people were carrying around like little tokens or little mementos or talismans from, people that lived before them. Like you said,
it's the evolution of ritualistic thought. It's the evolution of religion.
Right. Of like a pattern seeking nature of where they were burying people with some sort of ritual or something. It's endlessly fascinating.
I wrote a paper about this subject, and I really made my teacher mad, my cultural anthropologist teacher, because I wrote a paper about the paleoanthropological evidence for the rise of the ritualistic behavior in people. So pretty much, I have the evidence to show you why you believe in religion.
Interesting. Yeah, because let's face it, religion is kind of the cultural evolution of these ritualistic behaviors that is just run completely amok, right? I mean, it's the logical conclusion of burying your dead or thinking that your dead live on after the afterlife or whatever.
We have to have those concepts first before religion could ever take hold in us.
Right.
So I asked, well, when did we evolve those? Why do we care about our dead? Why do we care about our afterlife? Does a giraffe? No. Well, then when did it start? Why did it start? Because that's more interesting.
Right. And then you have, I can't remember the name of the chimpanzee that was in the study, but she had this pet cat And then when the cat died, she was very well adept in sign language. She kept showing the signs for sadness, and for she was remorseful that her pet cat had died. And it's like, it's just almost revering the people that are dead it seems like it's just sort of a logical construct that would go beyond just being sad that somebody is dead. It's like a coping mechanism, right? If somebody is dead, you hope against all hope that they're going to live on after they've died, or, have some sort of benefit or influence on your life. So then you just create rituals that is based around that.
And according to evolution, which it makes sense, the only groups that should ever happen in to care about missing somebody you've lost, are social groups. Mm-hmm. If an animal's not a social animal, it should never care about burying its dead or wondering about, where's grandma, because it doesn't need it. It doesn't need grandma. Mm-hmm. It lives alone. It eats alone. So that kind of behavior will never show up in, insert or an animal that stays by itself most of the time. Because it's not a social animal, it will never feel that pain because it's not advantageous to feel that pain. It doesn't need other animals like we do because we're social.
And that's kind of dovetails, that kind of goes in hand with taking care of our elderly, or taking care of people that are disabled or deformed in some way. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as it's just a construct of us being a society-based species, and it's just it's endlessly fascinating to me.
Well, yeah, that's why I started studying human evolution 8 years ago, and then it just went into everything possible. I know about Mars now just because everything connects. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, why do we have grandma and grandpa? Why is that advantageous? They don't do. Oh, wow. Grandmothers are advantageous because they give resources to the mothers in which they are breastfeeding for 9 months.
Exactly.
So they're increasing the resources, which then makes it more valuable to have a grandmother around for a long period of time until they become detrimental to the group, aka now the mother becomes the grandmother and the grandmother becomes the great-grandmother. And you don't need anybody giving you resources anymore. So great-grandmother dies.
Yes.
That's why we don't have great-grandparents.
It's an entire spectrum. There's no A or B. It's in a spectrum. I think that's the most fascinating thing that we've talked about tonight is just a spectrum. So for selfish reasons only, and maybe this will have some sort of benefit to listeners that get in arguments with people that don't believe in evolution, can you just really briefly kind of tear down the way that micro and macro evolution are separated? Can you tear down that wall? Because it seems like it's all just evolution as an umbrella term, that there really isn't this idea of macro versus micro evolution. Is that correct?
Okay. So, I wish that everyone, Christians and everyone, just assumed that you should probably take it's a sliding scale, it's a spectrum view of pretty much everything. Because when it comes to take microevolution and macroevolution, if an evolutionary anthropologist said those words to me, I would understand what they mean because they know I'm not going to try to take it out of context. But microevolution and macroevolution to maybe a creationist, the way they're using it is completely different. So they're going to go around saying, oh, I believe in microevolution. So they're saying that they accept the evidence that we have mutations, that they're not all bad. Because that's ridiculous. We have 200 new mutations every generation. It just happens automatically. It has to happen. And so they accept mutations, and they accept that we can kind of tinker around with hair color and maybe longer toenails and blue eyes. But that's microevolution. I accept that because we forced them to accept it, but not macroevolution. And that's where the sliding scale kind of mindset comes in. It's not black and white. There's not a gap.
Right. It's just a difference in perspective. If you're looking at a scale of 50 years or 100 years of just 1 or 2 or 3 generations of Homo sapien, yes, you're going to see very, very micro changes. But I mean, Homo sapien from 50 years ago can still breed with Homo sapien from now. But if you're looking at, I mean, it's just a matter of extrapolating out the amount of time. If you start to go beyond a few 100,000 years, you know, Homo sapien didn't exist 275,000 years ago. And obviously the distinction is made there that a hominid that lived that long ago couldn't breed with Homo sapien that lives nowadays. I mean, that's where microevolution turns into macroevolution along this sliding spectrum, and it can just all be covered under this umbrella term of evolution in general, right? So is there really a difference between micro and macro that way?
I view it as, like I said before, with whoever you're talking to is choosing point A and point B. So their microevolution is okay because they chose A and B. They chose me, and then they chose 500 years ago Homo sapien, and that should be enough mutations to be okay with B. Put it there. That's microevolution. And I'm like, no, keep going backwards. No, I don't want to move it backwards. No, if you keep going, we're going to hit 1,000 years, and we're going to hit 5,000. And then we're going to hit 10, and then we're going to keep going backwards and backwards. And then they don't often want to talk about what happens whenever you start to get problems. Whenever microevolution piles up so much, you still look the same. You still talk the same. You still think the same. You couldn't tell even externally that much of a difference. You maybe smell a little bit different. Maybe someone has a different sleep cycle. And over time, those mutations build up. And then if you want to have children, there's going to have genetic issues. They're going to have, maybe a higher incidence of stillbirths, or maybe it's going to be harder to get pregnant. Maybe something goes wrong in the womb. Maybe the head gets too big for the pelvis size. Of these micro things build up to cause the tiny little issues with having children. And those children usually end up decreasing. So this combination of microevolution piled up people that look the same, that think they're the same, but they try to have a baby, and 9 times out of 10, it doesn't really work out that well. If you then try to make a population out of this group, they look like humans, but you would not have a successful group whatsoever. That's the point of speciation right there. When your babies start to get really hard to not only have, but to keep alive, and then to have children, you've started your breaking point, because now you can't continue to mix your microevolution buildups. So these two branches will begin to split, and you're going to look the same for a long time. And that's why Neanderthals slept with Homo sapiens as soon as we found each other. After 800,000 years of being separate, we still had sex, and we still had children, but their genetics are still, I have like 2.8% or something. And they found out that Neanderthal brains have caused issues with our brains because of the fact that they had microevolution changes. So if you hit that breaking point of children having issues, any issues that decrease the reproductive value of them, it's going to start macroevolution. And then you just have to keep pushing that B point back. Okay, well, what about that species? What about that one? And eventually you're going to get to something that doesn't look human. And you're going to go, whoa, that's a freaking, frog-like thing. What the hell happened? Oh, wow. That's just a bunch of microevolution buildup. So micro and macroevolution are the same because it's just moving the goalpost, moving the A and the B. So if you start at me and then you go back 500 years at point B, of course I can have children with somebody that's 500 years ago, Homo sapien. But you keep moving that backwards, and you're still going to have a person that looks like a person, and you're going to get back to 200,000 years, and it's still going to look like a person. And then you go back to 300,000 years. And sure, yeah, they still look like a person. Maybe they might be a little bit shorter. They're still just as smart. They're still speaking some sort of language. They look like me. And we can pretty much look at the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, what happened to us. We were split for 800,000 years. And we got back together in Europe. And we had children, lots of them, because we still kind of look like each other. It's still a little weird. We probably smell different. One was shorter, one was taller, etc. But what happens is microevolution changes, little things that creationists accept will start to build up over time. And eventually, if you have two groups, that microevolution buildups will start to get to a point where if you have children, you're going to have a higher rate of stillbirths, of failed pregnancies, of having complications with the child, and you're going to be decreasing the reproductive value of the children and how many children you can have. And eventually these microevolution pileups will make it so your children just aren't surviving at the rate that they should be, and they're not having children. And that's the breaking point for this group. Doesn't matter whatever group. It's happened to every single branch in evolution, is that point where microevolution has piled up to a point where the children start having issues, or you start having issues having children. So that breaks the population in two. And so now these microevolution things that they accept are going to keep piling up to the point where you go backwards and backwards, and you look at a frog and you're like, whoa, that doesn't look like a person. How did I get there? Well, you got there from piling up microevolution changes, causing instability in children and reproduction, and branching a little bit more and branching a little bit more. And I don't want to have babies with that panther in that forest over there. They smell weird. They wake up a little bit too early. That's a microevolution change that can cause two populations to split, because that one smells a little bit different or is awake a little bit too early in the morning. And then that panther will become, a black panther, and the other group will become an ant. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, you're making some crazy connections here that are just blowing my mind. And I seriously, I have to admit, this has been an endlessly enlightening conversation. Hopefully you've given me a lot of terms to Google, and hopefully a lot of the listeners will be interested in a lot of the things you've been saying. But to sum this all up, give me your one sentence synopsis of the archaeological evidence that supports the Book of Mormon. Is there any?
From what little I know of the Book of Mormon, all of it I have found no evidence for, which isn't a very good start. So there's no horses, there's no elephants, there's no donkeys, there's no chariots, there's no weapons, there's no iron. I think the only thing they have is that there's people in the area at the time, which I guess they got lucky because the Clovis people did enter America. They've been hanging out for several thousand years. That's pretty much all they got right.
There it is.
So no.
That's pretty much all that they got right. There were humans. They existed here. And that's it.
Yep.
That's at that point these similarities break down, and the evidence that is asserted in the Book of Mormon doesn't necessarily align with reality in general. And that's something that's kind of the reason why I invited you on here, because oftentimes people that study these things, and people that let's just say Mormon apologists, will make the assertion that, well, you can read all that stuff on the internet, but there's nothing saying that it's really true or whatever. Well, okay, we can read stuff on the internet. There's a lot of really good information there. But it starts to come down to talking to somebody that actually knows the facts. Somebody that's studied it, somebody that's gone to school for it. And that's kind of why I brought you onto the show today, was just to discuss these things straight from a person that is in the know, somebody that studies similar things to what we're talking about here as far as evidence in the Book of Mormon.
And I think that whoever you go to, just make sure that it's a person that's not just saying, oh, because I said so, and I don't have to show you the evidence. You need to, help people be able to navigate the internet for real evidence, because it's hard.
Right, exactly.
You Google hominid and you're going to find 50% of them are photoshopped giants. And you're like, wait, what is true? What is not? How do I do this? So, I'm always willing to help filter through stuff. It's a pain in the butt, but it's really worth it to find the little actual real information out there. Just find the fossils and go from there.
And that's the important thing, is the real information that's out there. We can't just go off of internet conspiracy theories. We can't go off of what people write in a blog. We got to go with people that are actually have boots on the ground, have brushes to bones, or actually doing the research themselves. And that's That's why I appreciate your presence in the atheist community, and why I'm really happy to have you on the show. So just thank you once again. If there's
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's somewhere that people want to find you, if they want to hear your lovely voice in other places, if they want to learn more about you or contact you or discuss early hominids with you, where can they find you? Where can they reach Rachel Brown?
Well, I would say the most effective way is my Facebook. Just look up Rachel Nanon Brown. And I also do have a Twitter. I don't look at it too much, but it's at Rachel Nanon, Nanon. I'm on Atheists on Air podcasts, which we have lots of stuff on YouTube, but you're welcome to message me. I can go on any show. I can talk about any subject, even if you're Christian. I can be nice and help and just show you what's really out there and ask you what you think. I just like talking science.
That's it. You like talking science, and that's the important thing. You're not pushing an agenda. You're just saying, I know science. I like to talk science. I've researched science. Let's all come to a consensus based on science. And I mean, that's a very noble goal, and a very it's something that I really appreciate you for, and just what you do in your presence in the atheist community in general. You're a science communicator, which is something that the science community will always be lacking, because there's a huge disconnect from the standard everyday person that just reads news articles and watches TV and, stares at their belly button, versus the people that are actually out in the field doing the work. And I think you're one of those people, like you, and I mean, there's plenty of other people, Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, that bridge that gap, that allow us to tap into that wealth and plethora of knowledge that is beneficial to understanding the reality that we inhabit. So all in all, just thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for doing what you do, Rachel.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun. Have me back on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll probably have you back on sometime to talk some more crazy archaeological
Insert
stuff.
science subject.
Yes. Insert subject. Yes. Very nice. All right. Thanks for coming on. I'll talk to you later.
All right. See ya.
Once again, thank you for coming on, Rachel. That interview was a lot of fun, and it was very, very informative. And, I really hope to have you on the show in the future when something like this comes up in our studies. Alrighty then. I think that was a really good way to finish talking about anachronisms. However, we do need to talk about some of the problems with authorship of the Book of Mormon, dovetailing off the topic of anachronisms. And that is the end of part 2 of 3 of the Splitting Up of the Deconstruction Book of Mormon episode. Next week will be the release of part 3 of this 3-part series. Thank you for tuning in.